Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this council, approved by the mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we begin a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2019, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2024. Today we will hear testimony from the administration on the 5-year plan. And Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is?
Jane Slusser, Rob DeBoe, and Anna Adams.
Thank you. And good morning. You all are very familiar faces, so you know the drill. Please state your name.
Good morning, Jane Slusser. Anna Adams.
Rob Dubo.
Thank you.
Good morning, Council President and members of City Council. My name is Jane Slusser, and I'm Mayor Kenny's Chief of Staff. I'm here today to testify in support of the Mayor's proposed 5-year plan, all the supporting budget and revenue bills that were proposed on March 1st, and the city's revised funding proposal for the Philadelphia School District. I'm joined at the table by Rob DeBoe, City Finance Director, and Anna Adams, the city's Budget Director. Other members of the administration are here behind me and are also available to answer any questions that you may have. On July 1st of this year, the School District of Philadelphia will return to local control. The mayor strongly believes that the return to local control brings accountability to the city, and with that accountability comes a responsibility to ensure financial stability for our students, parents, and teachers. This includes ending the constant cycle of cutbacks to classrooms, reductions in the number of nurses and counselors in schools, and the endless cloud of financial crises hanging over the school year. We also believe that the greatest investment that we can make as a city is to improve our public school system. As last week's census data showed, we continue to lose families in the city when their children become school age. We need to reverse that trend and make our school system attractive for current and future residents. Over the past few years, under the guidance of Dr. Height, our public schools have made progress, improving early literacy levels, achieving the highest graduation rate in over a decade, increasing attendance, and cultivating better school climates. This progress is the result of strategic planning and investments outlined in the school district's Action Plan 3.0, which this proposed budget would sustain. The district's hard-won gains are worth celebrating, but have not yet reached every student and every school. The proposed budget would expand the work and accelerate progress by reducing class sizes and investing in classrooms and staffing. To be clear, this proposed new revenue will provide critical stability to the district and will allow district leadership to make investments to continue the recent progress made under the Action Plan 3.0. By no means do we think that these additional resources are enough. These funds do not provide for an adequate educational system, something only the Commonwealth can and is in fact required to provide. The administration is eagerly awaiting the result of the school funding lawsuit and looking to our partners at the Commonwealth to fulfill the constitutional requirement to properly fund our school system. That funding will then help build on the investments that we've already made as outlined in this plan to ensure all our kids have access to a quality education in their neighborhood. With information from the Office of Property Assessment on the FY19 property assessments last week, the administration is adjusting our proposal to meet the school district's immediate needs, and will be proposing an amended legislative package. Our basic tenets are the same. We propose to provide sufficient resources to solve the projected deficit and make important investments. The school district is projecting that without corrective action, its deficit would climb to over $900 million by FY23. We propose to increase the city's direct contribution to the district by a total of $100 million over 5 years. An adjustment to slightly slow down our previously planned wage tax reductions will generate an additional $340 million. Finally, we propose an increase to the property tax rate of 4.1% rather than the 6% that we had originally assumed would be needed to close the gap. In combination, the increased revenue from our growing property tax base and the revenue from the property tax increase will generate $530 million for the district over 5 years. Overall, this package will provide $966 million in funding to the district over the course of this plan. On average, assessments have grown 11%, and the impact on individuals will vary depending on what happens with the assessment on their specific property. Our original proposal included a commitment to protecting low and middle income homeowners, including through a proposed increase to the homestead exemption. Now that the certified property assessments are higher than we anticipated when we proposed the budget, we would like to increase the homestead exemption from the current $30,000 of assessed value to $45,000 to provide additional relief to homeowners. We propose to offset the cost of this increased homestead for the district through an increase in the real estate transfer tax to a local rate of 3.413% from the current 3.1%. All of this revenue will now be used to cover the cost of the homestead exemption, and therefore the proposed rate is slightly lower than our original proposal. We understand that these increases and rate adjustments are tough decisions for City Council, as you balance the need to fund our schools with preventing financial hardship for our residents. However, we strongly believe that providing this funding for Philadelphia schools is the most significant investment we could make to provide for the long-term strength of our economy and lowering of our high poverty rate. This proposal means that no one group of taxpayers shoulders all the burden. In fact, for a medium homeowner with a home assessed at $128,000, the property tax increase, combined with the increased homestead exemption, will result in a savings on their property tax bill if their assessed value did not change. Although our proposal for the district is the most significant proposal in the 5-year plan, the administration does include other key investments that will be used to strengthen the city. In partnership with City Council, over the last 2 years, we have been able to provide 2,700 pre-kindergarten slots to 3- and 4-year-olds all across the city. And our 5-year plan shows our intention to grow the number of slots to 5,500 by FY23. With the beverage tax lawsuit still pending, our ramp up is slower than we had originally hoped, but we are fully confident in our case. As you all know, additional beverage tax receipts for pre-K have been placed in reserve while the lawsuit is pending. When the lawsuit is finally resolved in our favor, we will spend the funds that we have placed in reserve, focusing on improving the capacity and capability of our early childhood providers to expand the number of slots in high-quality pre-K classrooms. Likewise, thousands of Philadelphia students and families have benefited from our 12 community schools, and by the end of the plan, we'll have grown these to 20. Finally, we are happy to provide additional resources for the Community College of Philadelphia in this plan. We believe this shows the administration's commitment in education from our youngest Philadelphians in pre-K all the way through adults attending college. The 5-year plan also addresses Philadelphians' safety. Resources have been proposed for the police and fire departments to expand personnel, allowing the police department to reach and maintain a sworn strength of 6,525, and the fire department to add additional firefighters and paramedics, as well as dedicated training and safety positions, and restore field technicians. The plan invests in violence prevention programming to support efforts to keep our young adults safe, and in criminal justice reforms in partnership with the DA, the courts, the Defender Association, and the MacArthur Foundation. The plan also adds funding for DHS to keep our most vulnerable children safer, with investments in foster care providers and additional caseworkers to keep families intact. An additional $2 million in annual investment in demolitions for L&I will also make a huge dent in removing imminently dangerous properties from our neighborhoods. In response to one of the other major crises that our city is grappling with, the plan includes additional investments to combat opioids, with funding for homeless respite and housing first programs, additional naloxone, working with physicians on medication-assisted treatment and police diversion programming. To address the city's homeless population, $1 million annually is proposed for the Hub of Hope, which, as many of you have witnessed firsthand, is providing high-quality services which are already having a positive impact. The 5-year plan and capital program also provides resources to improve our streets and further the goal of Vision Zero to end traffic fatalities. By repaving 131 miles annually by the end of the capital program, residents and visitors will notice a significant improvement in the streets. By redesigning streets and sidewalks and incorporating traffic calming measures, all of the users of our streets, pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers, will have safer journeys along Philadelphia's roads. We have set aside $225 million for future labor agreements and have also maintained a reserve for potential federal and state funding cuts that was included in last year's budget. There are many other investments that the mayor would have liked to include in this budget, but with all these crucial investments in our plan, our fund balances are hundreds of million dollars below where we should be. Our fund balance dips to a low of 37.8 in FY22, sorry, 37.8 million in FY22, and we have assumed moderate economic growth throughout our revenue projections. If there is a recession, we have limited reserves from which to pull to preserve our budget's funding for crucial services. We will continue to focus on maintaining and reducing spending levels during the fiscal year to control costs more tightly, and will carefully monitor revenues and make adjustments as necessary. Perhaps as large a financial challenge as our low fund balances is the funded status of our pension fund. The latest actuarial report shows that the funding percent is about 45. That low funding percent is coupled with increasing costs to the general fund. Pension costs will eat up over 15% of the FY19 budget. As you know, the administration has developed a multi-part plan to address the pension challenge. First, we are increasing the resources that we are putting into the fund. Over the life of the plan, we're projecting that the sales tax will generate $290 million for the pension fund. In addition, the pension board has substantially lowered the cost of its investments while increasing returns. We have also made important changes with our union partners that will help get the funding percent over 80% in 13 years. So far, those changes have been applied to members of DC 33, the FOP, correctional officers, and deputy sheriffs. That means that the reforms apply to over 17,000 employees, and we are hoping to apply those changes to all city employees in the near future. We look forward to working with council members as we discuss our budget proposal. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we and the other members of the administration here today are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lesser, and thank you and the administration for its continued commitment for education. As we know, that's probably the most significant thing that we can do is enhance our educational opportunities for our young people and our older people too, because we need to, with the workforce development strategy, I think that we'll put ourselves in a much better place to deal with the adult population. Real quick, did we recently get a downgrade?
Yes, S&P downgraded us on Friday from...
It was pretty recent, yeah.
It was pretty recent, yeah. From A+ with a negative outlook to A with a stable outlook. And in giving us the downgrade, they focused on our low fund balances, talked about our pension challenges, and the uncertainty about school district funding.
In terms of the pension, I mean, our pension, because of the significant amount of the workforce opting for hybrid, haven't we had an uptick in our pension environment, particularly given the returns on our investments based on an increased stock market? So that should not impact it any more negative than it has in the recent past, right?
Yeah. And they've acknowledged that there's some progress that we've made. I think they want to see what happens with the rest of the workforce before they give us full credit for making pension changes.
Right. But it's primarily our low fund balance.
I think that's the key thing, but you couple that with fixed costs, from things like our pension costs, then that adds to their concern.
Let's go to this issue with respects to the property tax. So we were informed that just by your testimony, we got an average of 11% increase in our assessments. So my question, do the revenue numbers in the 5-year plan include the increased assessments?
For the, you mean in the school district projections or in the?
Just the revenue generally. I mean,
Okay.
there's an 11% increase
We
in
hadn't
assessment.
included that 11% increase.
You
when
have
we
not?
put- No,
Okay.
in our base 5-year plan, because we didn't have that data when we put out the 5-year plan.
So I'm assuming we're in the process of updating that.
Yes.
Yes.
So I guess my question with that is if we kept the rate at 1.39, which was the existing rate, and we adjusted, well, we looked at the adjusted revenue based on the 11% increase, where will we be?
So we had assumed in the budget that we included we had assumed, I think, about a 6% growth in assessed value, and then it came out to 11%. So there's the difference of that. We could do that calculation and show you that.
Okay, but what is that, I'm saying?
I don't have that in front of me.
That's kind of important. I mean, you're asking for a tax increase. We'd like to know, with just the increase in assessments, what the number would be. So as council members deliberate around the additional need for
And
revenue.
assuming no change in the homestead too, is that what you're asking?
I'm just
asking what
11%
assumptions.
increase
Okay.
in assessments. What is that number, and how is it reflected in terms of dollars? And from at least from my limited perspective, there's a number associated with that, and I would think that you would start at that number to then determine how much you needed to raise the rate to get to a number where you need it.
The city, you're looking at the combined city and school district.
Right, I know.
Yeah, just wanna check.
So we'll have that.
Yes, we can get
You're
that.
working
to
on that too?
Mhm.
Because that's kind of important. Let me ask you a question. So we got a budget message, and we talked about a particular rate and a plan. And maybe 3 weeks, a month later, we adjusted that. At what point, I mean, it's not normal in terms of a change in the budget proposal that quickly. What actually happened? Was it?
We got the new assessment numbers, and they were stronger than we had anticipated.
All right. So we didn't anticipate, you said you didn't anticipate remotely closing
No,
that
we
up.
didn't. So when OPA does the assessments, they're looking at it on an individual property basis.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really looking at what it means in total, and they don't really get to that until the end of their process.
Mm-hmm.
So we really didn't have an indication that the growth would be as strong as it
Okay.
was.
Okay. Well, that's a good thing. It's a good thing that we didn't see that coming. Usually when you don't see something coming, it ends up being pretty bad.
Yes.
Let me ask you something with respect to the school district budget that was approved by the SRC. Does the school district's lump sum budget include the updated projections of assessments? So they're going to be getting additional money based on assessments. So do they have to go back and adjust their budget?
They
and request
do, although when we did our updated proposal, we did include the new assessments, and the numbers in our new proposal track pretty closely to what they had done, so it won't be much of a change to their lump sum.
on the school district side?
Yes.
It will not?
No.
Okay. Is that from them directly, or that's your?
That's us from,
What you
we're
were
looking
saying
at the
there.
numbers and comparing them to what the first proposal was.
Okay. I want to shift gears real quick. Commissioner here, I want to talk about, unfortunately, crime. A few months ago, last year, we named a special committee on gun violence and violence in general, and Councilman Johnson actually was listed as the chair from our end. And we had, leading up to that, in the aftermath of that announcement, we met with a number of advocates, 30, a lot of them, and I was impressed and and excited to see the fact that there were so many people who wanted to provide assistance on the ground. And while I welcome the increase in police department personnel, the simple reality is you still won't be able to have a police officer on every corner. You got to have a street presence, and we found over the history that that street presence, having peers and individuals who have been involved at that level, has been extremely helpful. So as a result of that, we moved down this path, and there was a conversation about looking at the existing revenues, the existing expenditures for organizations and groups. And although that number seemed kind of high, they said it was something like $60 million. And I'm like, well, okay, that's great. But understandably, a lot of people from the advocacy side, and either myself and I know Councilman Johnson and Jones, we were like wondering, where's that $60 million going? We should see some measurable results. So we thought we had started a process to determine where and how that $60 million was being spent, and if we can adjust it to be more productive, the whole 9 yards. But I really haven't heard much beyond that. And I know we actually just had to do a transfer ordinance to put some additional money in Mr. Ravel's budget, because we named an Office of Violence, Gun Violence, and with no real resources. So can somebody kind of tell me where we are with that? Because when I see an increase, a significant increase in police, I don't see a corresponding commitment from a financial perspective on those entities that would have to deal with on-the-street presence.
Good morning, Councilman Brian Abernathy, Deputy Managing Director. Yes, and you and I have had this conversation on a number of occasions. I think investing in those local community. Thank you, Councilwoman. I think you're right. Investing in those community organizations is important, and very much thankful for Council's support in increasing Mr. Ravel's budget. Those funds haven't been made available yet. Despite the passage.
What funds are you talking about? The transfer?
The transfer. And we're happy to have that conversation going forward.
All due respect, that's really not enough to do anything. I'm talking about the $60 million that was alleged to be a part of the annual budget and appropriations for organizations that would deal with violence and other related activities. And we were supposed to look at that, and we had a big press conference and announcement.
And we're still.
Where are we at with that? Who's in charge of that? What's the process? What's the timeline? Because to be honest with you, we sat in front of some folks who were extremely committed, and we kind of like promised them. And I know a lot of people don't take politicians' promises too seriously, but I kind of like want to keep my promise to this group of people. They were very serious about it, and we're getting a lot of calls and a lot of inquiries about where you guys at with that. So
we're still committed. It has taken us longer than we had anticipated. It's been a heavier task, and I believe we're on target for May for our first initial review, and we're happy to provide any information on that current review to you that we can.
You want to start the first review in May?
No, the first review has been ongoing, and that $60 million number we've actually believe is much less. I think we're at in the $30 million range, $13 million range.
Yeah, I mean that's the number that you all put out there. The $60 million. I thought it was like.
Yeah, and
I didn't think it was realistic, but I'm saying, hey.
Yeah, no, I understood, and I think there's a lot of programs that. That are considered violence prevention, a lot of programs are considered violence intervention, a lot of programs that could be considered either one. And I think as we try to look at that universe, that's a big universe. And I think when we really got down to it about what is actually happening on the ground in the neighborhood and in the community, it's around 13 million. And again, that review of those programs should be complete in
All right, so May. What? Because we're on the limb on this. I just want to tell you. Mr. Ravel? Morning, sir.
Okay, let me backtrack a minute.
Get your name for the record.
Sean Del Ravel, Executive Director for Office of Violence Prevention. Let me backtrack for a minute. When we first started out, the number was around $60 million. But after looking at the programs that fell under the preview of violence prevention, it evened out to around $13 million. The first part of the process has been completed. We have a 6-month report that we can provide. And going on, the second part, which is the most crucial part, is looking at how these funds directly impact the community. So we're going out into the community and talking to the community and see how, for one, are they aware of the organizations? Because a lot of 2 blocks away from where they live, and we found out that most people aren't aware. So looking at that and looking how we can kind of go into the new fiscal and reorganize the funds, we have to make sure that the funds are aware to the community. Holding us array of community focus groups, for lack of a better word, is one approach we're trying to take. So we will have some progress by the end of this fiscal year, by June. We're right around May at the very latest.
All right, so this is, in fact, and thank you for that. A couple of things with respect to your response. One, timing. We will hopefully conclude our budget process no later than early June. And I'd be concerned that if we got at the end of the fiscal year, some recommendations that would cause us to move money around or do transfer ordinances or whatever, reappropriate dollars. So having the fiscal year as the timeline for that is problematic for us in our capacity, because once we appropriate money, it's out of our hands. Administration can choose to spend it, not spend it, the whole 9 yards. So that timeline doesn't work in terms of us being able to feel comfortable about dealing with those individuals. Second, with respect to your reference to the community, does that include, or is it primarily the group of people that we met with on a couple of occasions? I know Councilman Johnson with his committee has had ongoing dialogue with those individuals.
It does include.
Or is it some other group?
No, it does include them, but I think the bigger picture is it includes individuals and organizations that I've been meeting with since I came into the office, that small mom and pop shops that are doing great work in the community that haven't been funded, that we haven't recognized. I think those are the individuals as well that we need to kind of empower. That's really part of the bigger conversation, that how are we going to include these individuals who are doing good violence prevention work in the community that we haven't recognized, along with those individuals that we've met.
It sounds like you're suggesting that the group that we met with were not relatively small mom and pop. So they were small groups. I mean, most of these people that we met with, frankly, weren't getting appropriations from us. I mean, it was. They were,
but I don't want to just focus on the individuals that came to our meeting. What I'm saying is we broadened the spectrum to look at individuals who had who didn't even know of our meeting, who in the community who haven't asked for funding.
Okay.
That was just given simple technical support to, or even figure out how can we replicate what they're doing in a bigger scale, in different parts of Philadelphia.
Okay.
And
because I don't want to abuse the chairs.
And Council President, I do want to make a commitment to you that we will get you a draft report in May, so you can consider it as part of it.
Can you accelerate that?
Yes, sir.
I mean, because I really would like to be in a position to have this be a part of this debate.
Yes, sir.
So if you can just give us a snapshot of where you are, soon, and then we can work on concluding the rest of it.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to give up the mic. I was taught by my predecessors to never abuse the mic when you're chairing a budget hearing. The chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Can we have him come back up? But just a quick question. Quick question. And the question is, by the time you get up here, first of all, good morning. And good morning to all of the dedicated public servants I see in the audience today. I want to thank you personally, because I've called most of you about one thing or another, and you have not returned my calls, so that's amazing to me. So thank you for that. And what I want to ask real quick is, have you applied for funding under the Pennsylvania Crime and Delinquency Committee up in Harrisburg? Have you applied for funding grants for any of these groups?
No, we have not.
All right, they do $83 million of appropriations every year funneled from the federal government. So if we can connect the dots and make those kinds of appropriate uses meet those kinds of available funding, it'll make your life a lot easier.
I do appreciate that.
Well, I see the expert coming up.
Yes, she is.
I got it.
Julie Wertheimer, Chief of Staff, Criminal Justice Managing Director's Office. Morning, Councilman.
Good morning.
The Office of Violence Prevention is not applying this cycle for the PCCD JAG grants. However, we are submitting 7 applications from Philadelphia tomorrow to the Commission.
Would that have anything to do with what the President and Councilman Kenyatta Johnson on gun violence prevention, are any of those appropriate 7 applicable to what they're talking about?
There are not direct applications focused on the work of the Office of Violence Prevention at this time. There are focuses on other areas. However, we do know that a number of Philadelphia-based organizations are going to be receiving funding from PCCD separate from this grant application process.
So connecting those dots might be a source of funding for them, and we do a lot of that appropriation monthly, so take a look.
I agree.
I want to shift to my question, but you made me go there, so can I start my clock now?
No, your clock is started, Councilman.
All right, then very quickly. We have been looking at, and we aren't surprised by, the request of the administration to take a hard look at property taxes and its increase as a way to meet the gap for education. But according to this budget submitted, I think 47% of Philadelphia's general fund comes from wage taxes and the like. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So I kind of want to know, on that end of the ledger, how we are going about recruiting new people to pay these taxes. Because at this point, based on what I'm hearing from polls, it's not being well received out there. About 6% on stranded folk that cannot leave, and that kind of increase on their real estate. So when you went after Amazon, which I think was like teamwork in its best example, how many other examples of that are we going after companies to increase the tax base so that we don't have to put the tax burden on real estate?
So I think that what you saw with the Amazon proposal, was sort of what the Commerce Department does every day, but a little bit on steroids because it was such a large project to be going after. And I think that they have since sort of, the time crunch and the sort of size of that project really, as you mentioned, harnessed a lot of energy around the city from different partners. And since the initial proposal went in on Amazon, those partners have sort of figured out how to use that initial proposal as a new type of business development strategy for any other type of business. And as we went into that process, we understood, is there a great shot of us getting Amazon? Hopefully. But is this an opportunity for us to also promote the city as a great place to come and do business for companies that aren't as large as Amazon, but are looking for new headquarters and are looking for all of the sort of different assets that the city brings in terms of our talent pool, in terms of affordability, and in terms of all the other sort of great things about our city. It was an opportunity to reach out to others, not just Amazon. But they are constantly involved in those types of business development projects every day.
So that kind of effort, I know you can't always say what companies we're going after, but to give us some indication that that same kind of effort is being applied. And then not just to the usual suspects of the Navy Yard. There are other industrial parcels that are out there that can benefit from the attraction, not just of Amazon, but the other 499 Fortune 500 companies that might be looking for a location. I figured you'd get up here in some time before my time ran out.
Good morning, Council people, Director of Commerce Harold Epps. A couple of things. Number one is we de-Amazon the proposal, I don't know, a couple months ago, and we have used it in a very significant way to recruit others. We're in the process of other negotiations. We continue to look to the suburbs to say the companies, Vanguard would be one example. We're not necessarily looking for you to move your corporate headquarters to Philadelphia, but because of the talent wanted to be in the city, we're asking them to consider satellite offices. With the creation of co-working space, we've had some pretty significant success of recent, in additional international companies that have moved to Philadelphia. We have a new outwardly focused cross-functional team looking to take the Amazon presentation, again, de-Amazon it, and make it very proactive and strategic about telling the Philadelphia story. So we are very confident, and we have a pretty significant pipeline that, of course, we can't negotiate in public, but you will be encouraged by what you will see in the latter part of this year and next year about new companies in addition to Amazon. And by the way, as it relates to Amazon, we still think we have a very good chance to win it.
Well, an inside story yesterday, they kind of gave us a lower ranking.
That still comes on?
That still comes on, yes. And according to them, I think it was the Brookings Institute and the Washington Post ranked us in some ways that wasn't complimentary. I don't agree with the Washington Post because they aren't honest brokers because their city is in competition.
And they have 3 locations in it.
Yeah, so we're going to discount that. But on those measurements, we need to constantly be trying to improve those measurements. They talked about crime, they talked about, I knew they were wrong when they said something about the restaurant scene in Philadelphia as well.
Well, you know, human beings write those stories and produce those shows, but I will say that, again, if you look at any of those measures and ask yourself, are we better than we were last year, 3 years ago, 5 years ago? And the answer across the board is yes. So we could always go faster, but my mantra is, yes, we're going in the right direction, but of course, we definitely need to go faster. But we're still encouraged.
Clock is running. As we look to the Amazons, and it's common knowledge now that I was probably the last person to sign off on the letter, and it wasn't because I don't like Amazon, but as my colleague talks about affordable housing strategies, unintended consequences when you bring 50,000 approximate employees that make over $100,000, that tips the scale in the rental market in a difficult direction for people, and I think it's 33% live below $25,000 that cannot afford some of these rental increases. So I'm hoping that as you plan to bring in prosperity, it is not to the chagrin of people who are here, but in fact are designed for people who can take advantage of those economic opportunities, those jobs, and working to make sure that we don't gentrify our way to the future. And I know you care about that.
Absolutely.
I haven't had conversations with you.
Well, let me just make one comment, and that is our counterpart, Ann Fadulin, is somewhere in this room, and she is more than capable of talking about all of the programs that we do have to try to mitigate it. I think we all know that we won't stop gentrification. But back to one of the core issues that the companies, no matter whether it be Amazon and others, talk about is education and talent pipeline. And so this whole budget is based upon the premise we must be very expeditious in improving our education and talent pipeline.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President.
Welcome.
Good morning, Jane. Good morning, Rob.
Morning.
Thank you for your presentation. I just want to go over a couple of small things regarding the proposal to fund the school district and just make sure I have the proper information as we move forward. One, is there a proposal to the state for any level of funding from our General Assembly? Is there anything official proposed by the City of Philadelphia from our representatives in Harrisburg to provide funding as a part of this budget? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, can you elaborate on the comment, Jane, specifically about the lawsuit, and how would that lawsuit impact additional funding for the school district of Philadelphia? And then the last part of the question, Rob, is 11% property assessed increasement. I want to know the exact amount that we will be bringing in as relates to the 11% property assessment, but also do you have that number broken down by district? Thank you.
So I guess I'll do the first and third part. And the second part. Okay. So on the last part, we're doing the district-by-district analysis now. We would like to sit down with council members later this week and go through each of your districts so that you can see what happened. On the first part, the school district's budget and 5-year plan assume the governor's proposal. So that what we would really want is to ensure that what the governor's proposed is what gets enacted by the General Assembly.
So for the record, there is no official proposal from the city of Philadelphia. We're taking our lead from the governor, what he proposes.
This year, that's correct, yes.
Okay. All right, just wanted to be clear for that.
Yes, and part of that has to do with sort of with the move to local control. We understood, we sort of took a look at the assessment of how likely it would be that we would see a large increase to help fill this deficit from the state in this year, and did not feel confident that that would happen, particularly in a year in which the city's taking back local control. We do feel, as I mentioned, that this helps us provide the district with stability, but is not adequacy. However, I think halfway through the local control process had the news on the lawsuit, which was great news, but we still know will take a period of time to be fully resolved, and so it wasn't something that we felt confident we could expect to come in a way that would provide us with the same stability that this package proposes. I really see this giving us the stability that the district needs to continue the advances under their current plan, and that it also enables us to be in a different type of position to go to the state, to lobby for more funding later, and to really reap the benefits of that lawsuit being settled by having additional investments. Because as we said, this is not really about adequacy, this is just about stability at this point. And we know that our schools can use that additional funding, and look forward to a day when we're getting more of that from Harrisburg.
Do we have the specific dollar amount that the governor is proposing?
We can get you that. We have it. I don't have it, but we can get you that.
Okay. I just want to say, just for the record, in terms of the work that we do here in this body, and I think it's, commendable that the administration has stepped up and said we're going to totally focus on funding education from a local level. But also, when I talked to my colleagues in Harrisburg, we had a lively discussion last week as it relates to bringing additional funding back to the city of Philadelphia. We need to increase their level of communication, because right now they think that they have no marching orders. And my response was, we shouldn't have to ask you to have marching orders for the children here in the city of Philadelphia. It should just be natural to step up to the plate. But also, being a former state legislator in Harrisburg, I do understand the environment where they look at the city of Philadelphia as a whole that wastes funding, and the children don't deserve it. But when they see the leadership stepping up to the plate and saying, regardless of how much we're putting on the table, you still have a responsibility to step up and also put something to the table because it's constitutionally mandated, it just sends a different message in the halls of Harrisburg. Because beyond that, they'll look at it as, well, we don't have a signal that y'all need any funding, therefore the legislators who are advocating on our behalf really don't have the type of support that they need. So whatever the strategy is, I think there needs to be an open level of dialogue and communication, because right now that's not what's going on. And it's been somewhat contentious between members of the legislative body in Harrisburg and the city of Philadelphia, at least from the conversations that I've been having. So that might be a different approach in terms of helping us as we move forward. That's all. But I would like to see those numbers, Rob, from the governor's office
we'll get
when
them.
you get a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning. I have a number of questions in reference to the budget. I'll ask some of the questions and then listen for your responses. So looking on in the budget testimony on page, I believe it's page 3 of your testimony, you talked about making an investment from a public safety perspective. But looking at last year's proposed budget, I believe the actual revenue, last year's initial proposed budget was $4.3 billion, but a spend of $4.4. This year's budget looks like it's a proposed revenue 4.61, but proposed expenses of 4.69. But we're talking about making a significant amount of investments in reference to hiring people for the city. My question is, where is the aspect of program-based budgeting? And when we're talking about increasing, even at a 4% tax increase and a reduction or slowing of the wage tax cuts, as well as a real estate transfer tax increase, how do we just juxtapose hiring additional people and making those type of investments when we're asking the citizens to pay more in taxes? That's question one. Question two, looking at the 5-year plan, it looks like it's about $218 million being allocated for a federal funding reserve. I know we also have a $225 million labor reserve. Just last week, Congress passed a $1.3 trillion omnibus appropriation bill, which has some significant increases, for example, like CDBG dollars, going from $3 billion to $3.3 billion. So I guess my question is, do we need to have that level of a federal funding reserve through all years of the 5-year plan? And then also, a question I had in reference to the capital program, and you mentioned on page 4 of your testimony, Vision Zero, but I didn't see any other type of investments regarding that capital program. So I'm curious in reference to that, if that will be held maybe tomorrow, because I don't see that information in your testimony.
So I'll start answering some of the questions, and then I think we'll
One last question.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, one last question. What is the break-even number of students that a school district needs to have at any point during the year in order to break even?
What was that?
The break-even number of students that need to be enrolled in the school district in order for them to break even.
I'm not sure I can answer about the school district break-even number. I think we'd have to get back to you on that one. We'll ask the school district for that detail. For FY19, we have 31 departments who are now going to be enrolled in program-based budgeting, and so when you get the budget detail, you'll see the breakout by programs. I know that was one of your questions related to your first part of your question.
Is that the budget detail? That's something that we normally get.
Yeah, you should get that this week.
This week, after the budget hearings got started.
Well, normally it's sort of, this came a little earlier than we anticipated. We also had the snowstorms, so it delayed us a little bit.
Okay.
But you should get the PDFs of the departments on Wednesday today, so you'll be able to look at the detail before their hearings on Wednesday.
But you said FY19, 31 departments are doing program-based
31,
budgeting.
altogether, between 18 and 19, there will be 31 departments who are now participating in program-based budgeting, and so you'll see the breakout of their expenditures by program rather than division. And so you'll see also performance metrics that go along with those, any revenues, and also the change from one year to the next with program-based budgeting. So I think you can also then see, as we've made our investments in the 5-year plan, you can see the change that we anticipate in terms of performance related to those investments. So as you look at it, you'll see that. So if we are investing in a program, so for example, L&I is a kind of an easier example, but as we've added funds for demolition, you can see we anticipate increasing the number of imminently dangerous properties demolished by that increased investment. And you'll see that throughout the plan and in the budget detail where we show any of our investments or even any of our cuts, how that impacts the performance metrics, and you'll see that clearly in the budget detail. We also included some of that in the 5-year plan. So if you look in the 5-year plan, we have performance metrics for each department, and they have been adjusted based on what our investments and our cuts are included in the 5-year plan. And so you can see that hopefully pretty clearly broken out by department. Those performance metrics we think are going to have a material impact are also shown in the 5-year plan. The rest of I just want to make sure I'm understanding the rest of your first part of your question.
You answered the easiest question first, but let me ask I'll follow up on regarding the federal funding reserve, which based on my numbers is about $282 million proposed over 5 years. Considering that there's been an increase, for example, in CDBG dollars in the omnibus appropriation bill passed last week, do we still need that level of funding?
So we do believe that we continue to need that reserve, and while so far the President hasn't been successful in implementing the kind of cuts that he's proposed. I think that threat remains as long as he's there, and I think it would be wise for us to keep a reserve.
And keep the reserve at that level?
Yes.
5 years?
Yeah, and that reserve, look at the scale of the cuts that he's proposed, the reserve would not compensate for all of them. It's just a portion of it. So I think that the reserve should stay at the level where we have it, yes.
Okay, and then going back to the other question regarding new hires and the increase in expenditures, the last two budget proposals, where we're also asking for the taxpayers of the city to pay for a property tax, wage tax, transfer tax increase, as well as a reduction of the wage tax cuts.
Yes, so we have, most of the increase increases are related to public safety, making sure that police and fire have the necessary personnel we think that is important for public safety. There are also a fairly significant change in the streets department. We have added funding for positions to support revenue initiatives as well as for grant funding. So we know that the streets department has an ability to access greater levels of federal and state funding if they have those positions to be able to kind of project manage different grants coming in. And so we have added about 19 positions in streets alone just to be able to access federal funding that we might otherwise not be able to utilize. So part of our investments are not only for revenue generating initiatives outside of public safety, but also to be able to access and spend down federal and state funding that we might otherwise not have had. We also add funding in the health department for we have it's called, we work with the state to kind of, and the feds to sort of blend city funding with state and federal funding, and we sort of see that return with higher levels of reimbursement rates. And so we include, there's about 18 million of that also included in the 5-year plan, each year of the 5-year plan related to increase sort of blending Medicaid rates. So most of our investments either are public safety or that they generate revenue either directly or through ability to access other funds. We try to be really careful about not increasing the general level of expenditures other than those kind of critical areas. We do include, there were cuts to about 15 departments included in the 5-year plan. The most significant was in the prisons department. When we were, due to the reduced census, we were able to get rid of some outside housing contracts. But we are trying to be very cautious about not expanding too much. We do have higher fixed costs. We know that we have increased costs for the pension fund, as well as debt service, and that's included in our budget, so that some of the growth is there, as well as the programs related to pre-K and community schools, which are supported by the beverage tax revenues. So those are the kind of the change for the last 2 years.
And I understand the need for additional investments from a public safety perspective and quality of life. However, what's the reduction in overtime if we're making those additional investments in public safety?
So with police, I don't think we've anticipated any particular reduction in overtime. Part of their overtime costs are related to court personnel. That doesn't change even though we were expanding the number of people in the sworn force, or we have a lot of demonstrations, and I know the police can talk a little bit more about this, but they just have to provide sort of staffing levels every time we have a protest, and we don't anticipate that changing, particularly in the plan. We just seem to be kind of there's a lot more marches, a lot more protests, and this is kind of becoming the new normal, I think, with the changes that are happening at the federal level. With the fire department, in the first couple of years, we actually anticipate that it will take some time for the fire department to fully staff to where they would like to be. So even though we're expanding the certain number of positions in fire, it takes some time to recruit and train these paramedics and firefighters, and so there will be this continuation of relatively high levels of overtime in the fire department until they are able to staff up appropriately. So the budget allows for them either to use overtime or to hire individuals. And for in the fire academy, it takes about 6 months for individual firefighters to be actually out on the street. So even though we're giving them the positions, we're not going to see a reduction in overtime immediately. We are anticipating over the 5-year plan, eventually the higher number of staffing levels will be allowing us to be able to reduce overtime there. But in the first few years, I think that it will remain at relatively high levels of overtime until they've managed to hit these staffing levels.
My bell's rung, but I have one last question. You talked in reference to police overtime, scheduling in reference to court appearances. That is a management perspective, and also something that can be addressed, especially considering we have a new district attorney. From my experience of being in the DA's office, often ADAs are doing subpoenas for officers based on their belief who they may need for that either preliminary hearing or that trial. So has there been any conversation with District Attorney's Office as well as Public Defender's Office regarding how we can better manage overtime, since based on your statement, we can do a better job reducing overtime based on court appearances?
I think Brian's going to answer that.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman. Yes, we have had some conversations with the district attorney, and we're optimistic that those conversations will lead to long-term changes in how court, specifically preliminary hearings, are managed going forward. But that is also a conversation we have to have with the courts, not just with the district attorney.
Right, but so based on those conversations, do you have a targeted goal for reduction of overtime based on court appearances?
We do not have a targeted reduction at this point because because the system isn't just us and it's not just the district attorney, it's also the courts. We need to be able to advance that conversation further down the road before we can identify exactly what those savings will be. They're relatively early on in the conversations.
Okay, but it's mostly from the district attorney's perspective in reference to sending a subpoena to a police officer to appear at a criminal proceeding.
One of our largest drivers of overtime is preliminary hearings. Because officers are actually required to come into City Hall for those preliminary hearings, part of the conversation is with the courts to see if they would be willing to have some preliminary hearings back in the districts, which would in fact reduce our overtime significantly. But again, that's a broader conversation that we can't dictate to the courts, and one that we want to work cooperatively with them long term.
I'll see you next round.
Thanks, Councilman. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just want to make a few comments. First, I want to thank all of you and people sitting behind me for all your cooperation and help this past year and prior. You guys have been great. I'm in total support of the programs the administration wants to do. I have a different opinion on how we can raise the money for those programs. So I want to just ask a few questions, and I'll get to some of the other questions I have. In our real estate taxes, from July 16th to June 2017, the city's portion was $586 million, which means we got about 45%, and the school district got 55%. That's our 45. It increased to 651, which was about a 12% increase in real estate taxes collected from 16 to 17 to 18, a 12% increase, which means the school district got 80 million more, which is 5 times 80, 400 million over the next 5 years. Where did our 64 million exactly go, the delta that was raised, which is 12%?
Where did the city put, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure.
Yeah, where did the city put our 64 million? Because we raised real estate taxes 12% in the prior year. Tax collection was up 12%.
Tax collection, so part of that is a kind of combination from increased assessments as well as a better collection rate.
But it's still the same pocket.
Right, yeah, I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. So it went to our general fund, and from there we've been able to do a few things. Our fund balances have grown slightly. If you look at what we've included as our proposed budgets, our fund balances have actually grown over the last couple of years from what we originally proposed. I think in FY16, so you can see some of that has fallen to our fund balance. But then the rest has gone into things that we know have gone up in our costs, such as pension costs, and then general changes in the budget. We've had some labor agreements that are included in the budget since 2016. We've had adjustments that we've made in different departments, spending. Would you like us to give you a specific breakdown of each of those?
You can give me a specific, you don't have to do it right now, but here's
Okay,
my general
we can give
point.
you a specific
This is
kind
my
of-
general point of view.
Yep.
We went up 12%. Whether you say assessments are going up 11 and the rating the rate of 4.1, it's the same pocket. We're raising overall another 6 ballpark. And it's way ahead of the rate of inflation. And it's way ahead of what most people in the city can budget for. And I guess my concern is that in the business world, when you need money, the first thing you do is you look inside your business. And you eliminate or cut overhead, you negotiate better, you buy better, and the last thing in the world is you raise prices. In government, not just Philadelphia, but across the board, what I see is the first thing we do is raise prices or raise taxes. We don't always look inside as well as we can.
And actually, the first thing that we did with the school district gap, we knew there was a gap of 900 million that we knew we weren't going to be able to fill just directly. But the first place we did look was that we actually increased the direct contribution from the city of 20 million annually. That's the 100 million before we made any other adjustments, knowing that we wanted to make sure that we were not having to either reduce the tax rate for the wage tax or increase taxes. We looked first at our current spending level, and that's where we adjusted first, and then we made some other changes. We also needed to balance that, the need for the school district also with our need, especially around public safety. And so this is a constant balance and constant trade-off that we grapple with too.
And I'm not saying I'm against any of the programs. All I'm saying is how we're funding them is what I like to look. I'd like to see us look inside more to figure out how we have to do this. It might be, I know we've talked about this, we're doing program-based budgeting. We might need to next year look at zero-based budgeting to really clean out the system and figure out what our real costs are. I know nobody really likes to do that, okay? But that's the only way you're going to get to a real budget of what and figure out the real savings.
I think part of what we look at with program-based budgeting is also as each department has been moving to program-based budgeting, they examine each of their activities by program to really understand how to allocate their current resources based on that. And I think that has allowed us to really the way that we look at program-based budgeting is not only are there savings, are there opportunities to find savings within each program, but also can we make sure that we're using our existing resources better? And so we see that in terms of kind of linking activities and performance metrics and pushing the conversation with departments as to how they can make sure that they're improving outcomes for our residents, and they're improving the services within the with the existing resources. When we meet with departments all the time, the first thing that departments have done, rather than making a request for additional resources, is they looked internally at their own resources and tried to look at ways that they could be more efficient with the current resources they have. So even though that some departments didn't see any increase in the proposed budget, I think that they've been able to squeeze those existing resources by saying, are there positions that we don't need? Can we use these positions more effectively? And I think you see that in the performance metrics we've included in the plan. So we should see improvements in services. We should see in terms of kind of outcomes that we're getting for kind of the bang for the buck by departments looking first through program-based budgeting about what they're doing. And we really hope that makes a big difference.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't believe it.
Okay.
So I respect your opinion, though. I believe we can find the savings. And look, I've been in business 38 years. I just know how you can find savings. So I don't buy that. I think there's several areas, and I know the administration's been supportive of collecting delinquent real estate taxes. I think in the prison system, and I've said this publicly, I don't understand. I think the MacArthur grant's great. I don't understand how our budget's not going down dramatically. And I think there's a lot of money that could be saved in a lot of different areas before we go out and raise taxes. And that's going to be my general theme, just letting you guys know. Going forward, probably no shock to any of you. But I don't understand, if program-based budgeting is working, how do you explain to the average resident of the city that they keep getting real estate tax increases and other increases? I would say if I'm the average resident, it's not working.
Well, the increases that we're proposing are not for the city's general fund.
Well, a portion goes to general fund. 45% of the real estate tax increase goes to general fund.
The property tax rate increase that we're proposing is not for the city.
It's going to all go to the school system.
It's all
100%.
for the school district.
And is there any way to make that school district more efficient in their request of the money? And has anyone really looked at how that money is going to be spent or
Yes.
invested?
We work with the school district pretty regularly. I mean, one of the challenges, actually, of the school district is that they spend a very small amount on their overhead, their administrative costs. And I think if you compare them to any other urban school district, I think they're probably one of the lowest costs in terms of their admin costs relative to other large urban school districts. So it's tough because I think in the last few years, they've had so many cutbacks that their investments in the kind of the internal services are very small. For us to be able to look for further efficiencies there is difficult. I think where we're going to see improvement with local control is just improvement in collaboration, information sharing, which we hope will lead to better outcomes. So I'm not sure we're going to see any large dollar amounts savings in the school district via kind of improved collaboration.
On the school system side, and I've said this publicly too, I don't see us teaching personal financial literacy from kindergarten to 12th grade. And that's one course that would dramatically change the path of generational poverty. Over 20 years it might take. But we should be teaching kids from kindergarten to 12th grade personal financial literacy. So if you ask me to make an investment in that, I'm 100% there. But and everything else, I get it, but I would like to see that occur.
Yes, and I do believe that the investments that we're making in the school district will help with that goal in terms of just basic literacy, which has been a major investment of the action plan.
Right. Let me ask you a question. The school district's deficit goes to 23. Do we know if there's a deficit in 24?
So we've set one of our goals in setting this up was so that they wouldn't go to deficit in 24. So if you carried it out another year, they would still be positive.
One other question. We have $3.8 million increase in this budget for the land bank. Is this going to fund increased sales out of the land bank, increasing our tax revenues, or what is the exact plan?
We can have someone from the land bank come and answer that directly, but I don't know where that ends. Yeah.
You can get back to me. I don't have to
So
worry.
Ann's coming right now. But this is to fund some of their acquisition and part of their general, they have a plan that they've set out, that the board has set out, and the land bank requested $3.8 million in additional general fund, but Ann Fadulin is here and she can...
Let me ask you this question before we get to the land bank, though. We'll come back to it. Based on what we know now, do you think zero-based budgeting is an option for us to look at next year?
I think the challenge with zero-based budgeting is that where governments have done that well, they're much smaller than we are. It's very difficult to do that at a county and a city level with the large-scale departments we have. We could probably look at some small departments and start looking at seeing what it would take to do zero-based budgeting. It's a very resource-heavy project, I will say. And when we've looked at other cities, because we examined this pretty heavily, we didn't see the value. A lot of the times, generally when we talked to other cities and they talked about how they did zero-based budgeting, the results ended up being pretty similar to what they've done, and they didn't have the link to performance, which we really felt strongly that we should be able to demonstrate the value.
Right. But would it make sense for us to just maybe test 5 departments that have big budgets and say to those 5 departments, let's see if you can do zero-based budgeting, let's see what the results are?
I think we could definitely look at a couple of small departments and see what it would take with those small departments. I think doing it with the larger departments, I think will take multiple years to do that effectively. I don't think that you can do that in a few months. I really think it's actually a very long-term project. I think we could try looking at a couple of small departments and see whether we can test to see whether the outcome changes anything. I think as the departments have moved to program-based budgeting, they've looked at all of their existing resources and reallocated, which kind of gets you to the same point where they can say, okay, we're starting this program from scratch. What needs to go into it to make this program work? I think it gets to the same point without quite as much of an administrative burden. Ann's here anyway to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the land bank budget, we can get you the full breakdown of it, but what we're really looking for from the general fund is to cover the cost of acquiring properties, which are tax delinquent properties that the land bank has the ability to get through sheriff sale. In order to do that, there was an MOU that was signed between the city, the school district, the water department, kind of almost any entity that had a lien on the property. And what the agreement says is that the land bank will pay either the assessed OPA value or the amount of those liens, depending on whichever is less. So even though that money comes to the general fund, based on what we have to pay and what that amount is, some of that money then will get either returned to the general fund or returned to the school district back. So there's a portion of that that will end up recycling.
Do you think it's working?
Honestly, I think we're getting it geared up to work, but I don't think it's where it needs to be yet.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. The answer to your last question is that it's not working because we haven't done it in earnest, but I do want to commend the administration for putting a significant amount, comparatively speaking, of money in the land bank so we can genuinely move ahead on equitable development.
We look forward to getting it up and fully operational as much as anybody else does.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Good morning, everyone.
Good.
So let me just start out, number one, by echoing the comments of my colleagues and thanking everyone who's here on behalf of the administration, and particularly the folks who service our city. Thank you so much for all the work that you all do, and it's just so valuable. And just as an example, Ann Fadulin, who was just speaking, I want to thank you for coming out Saturday morning and spending your Saturday morning with a community group that was pretty rowdy. So, so thank you so much to all of you for all of the work that you do. We really couldn't do what we do without you. I do have a few questions, and I'd like to start actually in an area I was going to get to later, but I wanted to bring it to the forefront, and that's the fund balance. And I guess I'd like to hear more about the credit downgrade on Friday, and shouldn't that trigger some sort of a reassessment of our priorities, since that downgrade is going to cost us money? I didn't hear anything about that.
Yeah, first, it's not clear that the downgrade will cost us money. We have 3 ratings from credit rating agencies. That was our highest rating. Your price tends to be driven by your lowest rating. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they reduced our rating probably won't increase our cost.
Okay.
That said, obviously, it's not a good thing. We'd rather that it not happen. We did know before the downgrade that where our fund balances are is an issue. It's always a trade-off for us between where that fund balance is and the investments that we think are critical and have to be made. Mm-hmm. And how we got to those specific fund balances is really a result of the other investments that we think we need to make.
Okay, but there is an internal process that says that, when these sorts of things happen, that there is going to be additional action taken by the administration to sort of begin to correct, sort of corrective steps, if you would.
Yes, we were always kind of looking at that and always mindful of what the rating agencies think and where we think our fund balance should be, so yes.
Okay, very good. I wanted to ask about a couple of things, primarily, Jane, from your statement earlier. And I guess I was a little bit confused. So in the beginning of your testimony, you talked about the stabilization of the Philadelphia School District and how the investments that we were going to make would essentially do that. And then further down, it stated that this does not provide even an adequate educational system. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because that is confusing. I'm thinking if it's stabilizing, it's moving us in the right direction, that it is an acceptable level of funding, and then to hear that it's not an adequate educational system, it's just, to me, it's a mixed message.
Yeah, so what we're proposing here with sort of closing the deficit means that the school district can continue to provide the current services, and that we won't have to look at budget cuts, which could include teachers out of classroom, nurses out of schools, that type of thing. And so this is sort of allowing us to continue on the limited but continued progress made under the Action 3.0 or the Action Plan 3.0 from the district, which is starting to show progress, again, not as fast as we would like to see through the execution of that. When I talked about we don't see this as being adequate, that sort of spoke to Councilman Johnson's question earlier about the need to look for more resources from Harrisburg in the future, but we feel like this allows us to at least not turn back and to continue the progress that they've made, but we feel that there are opportunities for more, but that's also a place where we would be looking in the future for funding from Harrisburg and help from Harrisburg, and expect to see that in the future.
Okay. Another statement that you made is that what we are attempting to do is to make our schools attractive for current and future residents, and I don't see how by just maintaining. I don't see how we are making our schools attractive in the future. I don't see a vision for how that's going to happen. And beyond that, I'm wondering if you can talk about what we spend in Philadelphia versus what's spent in the counties.
Yeah.
So in Lower Merion, I think they spend about 10 to 12,000 more per pupil than we do here in the city of Philadelphia. So with the increases, how close does that get us to a Lower Merion or to an Abington or Radnor Township? How far does this move the ball?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if Rob knows the exact numbers or if somebody else does on the comparison to any surrounding counties. What we're looking at really is continuing to invest in the programs that have helped increase early literacy rates, have seen increased scores, have seen increased graduation rates. So there is progress in the district. I know that I think part of it has to do with providing this stability so that we could see the recent progresses continue. And I think part of it is also a concerted effort, from all city leadership in sort of turning the narrative around the district. I mean, we talk a lot about all these problems all the time without highlighting a lot of the successes. We sent a Rhodes Scholar, or we graduated a Rhodes Scholar, last year. And there are a lot of great successes that we have that we also see as part of just turning around that narrative. But to your point, I think that there is a very clear plan laid in place by Dr. Haidt, and this allows us to continue that. And we've only seen in the last 2 years sort of the benefits of that begin. So I think it's a long road, but the important thing for us is really not turning back and investing more in the future.
I think that people, the citizens of Philadelphia, we want a quality educational system. We all want our kids to go to have environments that are not violent, that offer the kind of structure and support that help our kids get the quality of education that they certainly deserve. And so I guess I have some concern that we're raising taxes, the proposal is to raise taxes significantly. And in raising these taxes, it's almost as if we have a car that's not running. We still have a note on it, and so we're able to make the note payment, we're paying off the note. But at the end of the day, the car is still not running or performing as it's supposed to. And so, I just wanted to make mention of that because, again, it's a lot of funding that we're asking for. And also, I wanted to review the numbers that were put out by the administration because I did the math and I've come up with several different totals. The numbers in your presentation this morning were $340 million in wage tax, $100 million from the general fund, and $530 million from property tax, which is a total of $970 million. And yours was off just slightly at 966, but then the mayor, when he spoke to us in council, said it was around 980, or it could be $915 million, depending on how you calculate it. If you take out the transfer tax increase, which in your document states that that increase was really just meant to offset the increase in the homestead exemption. So can you explain why all of these numbers are so different?
Yeah, so I mean, there's reason for confusion, which is really the changes that we made based on having the final numbers from the reassessments. So our original allocation for the school district in the budget was 980. It's now 966 based on this proposal. So that's a $14 million difference over the course of the 5 years of the plan for the school district. In terms of the changes to the transfer tax, in the original proposal, some of that was going towards the district, and now that's just being used. It's a lower rate that's only being used for the homestead exemption increase, which we had originally proposed to be up to $30,000 and is now up to $45,000. And so the differences there, I think, really are the basis of our revised proposal in light of the finalized assessment values, because we're really, understanding that this is going to, the increase in values is going to have a huge impact on homeowners. We wanted to make sure that we were increasing the homestead to address that, and also, asking for what we needed to fill the district's deficit, and not more than that.
Okay. Okay, I'll come back.
Okay.
I'll come back.
Thank you. Real quick, and this probably will be a good practice for future hearings, maybe even the Capitol, particularly given the emphasis on school district issues relating to tax increases, proposed tax increases. Can we have, and we're coming back to local control, can we have the school district here as a part of the 5-year plan, as opposed to the 2 days that we set aside for them later on in the budget process, and also as a part of the capital, because there are a lot of capital issues relating to the school district, although may not directly related to our capital, but probably makes more sense as we move ahead to have them a part of this, the first 5-year plan. So we've, in understanding that, and you probably know, we've asked for Ori Munson to come over, because a lot of these questions are related to school district, and I understand, since for my members, he should be here sometimes after 12, so we can address some of those concerns that were raised about school district funding. Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. Still good morning. The funds for the school district, $900 million or so, what is that money going to be used for? Do you have a budget of what that money is going to be used for by the school district?
So it's not that the $966 million is budgeted for specific items. The $966 million is to get them to financial stability, to allow them to continue to implement the programs they've been implementing that have brought the successes that Jane was talking about.
Okay, to me it's a little vague, and my problem is that the school district has performed poorly and financially irresponsibly. It's been a bad system, and it's gotten worse. And so the issue is that we're going to raise taxes to give a poor performing entity more money. And I would like to see that they provide us some specificity in terms of what exactly they're going to use that money for, so that we could balance out how much money we should give them based on what the citizens can afford and what our expectation is of the improvement in education. The other thing that concerns me is, while we have taken back local control, we've basically implemented the same system that got us in trouble in the first place. There hasn't been a system of best practices with transparency and other things, and there isn't even an equitable distribution of resources and funds to underserved schools. It's just the same system getting more money that was mismanaged in the first place. So there are great schools, and they've always been great, and there's bad schools. They've always been bad. My thing that I don't understand, and I think I need some explanation, is we have 84 or more charter schools, which means all those new buildings, which aren't accounted for in the school district budget, are going up with private investment. There's been capital raised, money spent to build new buildings, put new equipment in them, and the school district, while it does provide, the money for the students, doesn't provide the rest of the money that is the initial investment of capital. The school district needs still more money and is facing more deficits. And after the 5-year plan and our wage PICA tax sunsets, and we're trying to convert that into a city tax of $350 million a year, and as the 10-year abatement subsides and we're getting hundreds of millions of dollars in, where is the money going specifically? Because my opinion is that the taxpayers cannot sustain this level of tax increases year after year. I'm curious, do you have a study of basically, with the tax increase, how it is affecting the average citizen in Philadelphia?
There's a lot in there, so I'm going to try to cover as much of it as I can. I'm going to go back to kind of your first statement that things in the district are getting worse and that it hasn't been managed responsibly. I disagree with both of those comments. You can look at results, things like graduation rates, literacy rates, they've all been improving. And I think the district can give you more details on that, and if Ori's coming, he can talk about that.
Yeah, I'm really talking over 16 years.
I let you go. Let me
Yeah, sure.
talk, please. And in terms of their financial performance, they have turned deficits into positive fund balances. What they're facing, though, are a number of costs completely beyond their control. For example, their pension costs. It's a state-run pension system. They have no control over it. It's gone from 5% of their payroll to over 35% of their payroll. It's a big driver of what's happening to them. Charter school costs, that's another big driver of what's happening to them. So there are costs beyond their control that are driving what's putting them into deficit. That's not bad financial management on their part. Those are things that are beyond their control. So, there's kind of fundamental differences in what we view has been happening over the last couple of years at the district.
Okay, we disagree on that, yeah.
Yeah. And then in terms of some of the things you said about city funding, I'll just make clear when you talk about the PICA tax and the PICA tax going away and becoming a local tax, that's a tax that's in place now, that we get the vast majority of that revenue now. The only revenue we're not getting from that is for PICA's debt service, which has been reducing over time, so that by the time it goes away, it's probably about a $20 million difference. So we're not talking about $300 million in new revenue. We're probably talking about $20 million.
Yeah, let me be clear. Let me be clear on that point.
Yeah.
The PICA tax will sunset.
So, yes, remember that the PICA tax is a portion of the wage tax.
Right.
So that was city wage tax money that was redirected to PICA to pay off PICA's debt service for as long as that debt service was outstanding. That debt service goes away at the end of 2023 and has been declining over time. So it's not like a sudden windfall in '24. It's
I
just a
understand
little bit of debt service that's
Right.
left.
So how we fundamentally look at it differently is I look at it as a tax upon the wages of the citizens and workers of Philadelphia to pay a debt from the money that was borrowed, that when that debt is paid off, that tax is no longer needed. You're looking at it as a city tax that will continue, and I understand the difference, and maybe it will.
Right. And it wasn't a new tax that was put in place to pay that debt service. It was an existing tax that was redirected. So it's not like this was a new tax and its purpose was just to pay debt service. It was taking money that already came into the city's general fund.
Understood.
And using part of it to pay debt service. And it was never that all of that amount went to pay debt service. Part of the reason that it was segregated the way it was to give strong debt service coverage for that. So it's only been a small portion ever that went to the debt service. So taking that all away when the debt service goes away would be taking away much, much more than was ever actually spent on debt service. So it would not be
Sure.
It would not be eliminating a tax that had been for a specific purpose.
However,
it would be a major cut in revenues that came to the city.
Sure, the revenues of that, once you pay down the debt is completed, and as you are using the money that you're not sending over for city purposes.
I'm sorry, say it again. I missed what you just said. I didn't hear it.
I'm just going to skip this because I'm going to run out of time.
Okay.
Let me go to this. When the state, because of the school district that went broke and had problems, when the school district was taken over by the state state also took over the parking authority simultaneously for what they claimed was a state need constitutionally allowed because they were going to fund the school district, which, at least according to the first act when they took over the school district, and according to their arguments in court, they were going to provide $40 million a year to the schools, which they have not done. And why should...
We agree on that.
Okay, and here's where we may disagree. The parking authority, now that we have the school district back and all the financial problems that come with it after 16 years, we should get the parking authority revenues back.
Can't argue with that.
Is that a yes or a no? Is that a yes or a no?
Councilman, put a question mark behind that. I think they're suggesting that was just a statement, not a question.
No, it's not a statement. I have a bill, and I want the administration's support on the bill to take back the on-street parking functions of the parking authority.
Yeah, we support that.
Oh, you do support that? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you take the revenues of the parking authority and offset the property tax increase in your budget?
No, we can't because we don't control the parking authority. So we can't do something based on something that has not been enacted. Require state legislation, so we wouldn't...
We don't require state legislation. We have to pass a city
Yeah,
bill.
no, we would require state action
So
to
there's
get
where
those
we
revenues
differ,
back.
right? We differ in terms of your understanding of the law and my understanding of the law in terms of what we can do as a city, regardless and without state authority.
Right, and I'm not a lawyer, so I would defer to the law department on that.
When we come back, I want to understand the city's policy. I understand that the property is assessed 11% higher this year. Let's say somehow it is. Is it your policy that every time you assess property higher than what people can afford to pay, that you go ahead and tax them? Do you tax them based on what they can afford to pay? Do you tax them because you've come up with an increased property assessment that I don't understand and I don't think is legitimate? But how do you see the property assessment and taxing policy in comparison to what average citizens can pay?
Right, so, we share your concern about what that means for affordability, and that is the reason that we're proposing to increase the homestead from $30,000 to $45,000, so that it will help offset some of that growth and make it easier for people to pay their property tax, particularly people with lower valued homes. And I think, Councilman, I think we also have a meeting set up with you to go through the assessment process, because I know you had some concerns about that, and I think it was scheduled for one of the snow days, but I think it's been rescheduled for either later this week or early next week.
I appreciate that. My time is up for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. At some point, Councilman, because there is an issue about the parking authority, it tends to be a subject of conversation when we have public comment every Thursday in council as it relates to the legality of the city taking back the parking authority and its revenues. We will probably ask our city solicitor, maybe even today, to give us the official ruling. It'll be your first prime time. You want to do it right now? All right. Thank you. Maybe this can limit the public comment on our next
Sure, I'll be
session of
short.
council.
Marcel Pratt, Acting City Solicitor. We don't have a decision yet, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Somebody told me you were a rookie. I don't know about that. That would be helpful, though, as soon as you can get some level of response. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Keona Sanchez.
Good afternoon. That was quick, right?
Yeah.
just around the decision-making around the revenue generators, why did we discount the ability to go to a different millage split between the city and the school district versus tax increase? For many years, we've talked about going to a 60-40 split. Why was that taken off the table?
Which would adjust the amount, so you'd prefer that we would reduce the amount of the city portion of the, is that what just basically move money
because
from
we
the city
had
to
a
the district?
11% windfall, and we know that as we do annual assessments, there will be some natural increases in our real estate. Why not do the split as opposed to a tax increase?
I think we looked at our package as sort of twofold. One is that we increased our direct contribution, and so we kind of, that's one way.
Another way, as opposed to
one way of doing it. I think we also wanted to be cautious of. We also know we have our own financial challenges, and so we also need to make sure we needed to be able to make the investments we needed to make in the city budget, as well as have some level of fund balance. And so it was constant trade-off between those two issues.
It was because you wanted additional money. What is going to be the short windfall of our use and occupancy because of the 11% increase in real estate taxes?
I don't think we have calculated that.
But there is an expected increase on that.
There should be a change in the use and occupancy tax. We haven't calculated that.
Okay. When will you have that available? Because I think that's an important part.
I think we'll work with the school district, and we only just got the assessment data last week, so we'll have to work with the school district.
I'm sure Yuri is working on it. Why did we choose not to, in light of the Trump windfall for major corporations, why did we choose not to do a use and occupancy increase where most of those big corporations have seen major windfalls for use and occupancy as a way of filling the $20 million general fund contribution?
I think part of that is looking at the use and occupancy increased significantly last year because of what happened with assessments. Mm-hmm. So there was already kind of a big increase from the prior year in UNO.
But they got a big windfall, and they're getting another one from the feds.
And again, I mean, we looked at the hit they took last year, and that's why we did what we did.
Okay. So will you calculate what that $20 million would mean for millage as it relates to UNO? The $20 million general fund contribution that we're making $100 million general fund contribution.
We can calculate that.
We can calculate that. In light of our fixed cost, and some of the pension stuff, and I know Councilman Don was talking and Councilman Green around zero-based budgeting. Anna, you spoke that when we get our budget binders, we'll be able to see some of the savings and reassessments in our performance-based budgeting. Is that going to show us percentage of what we saved and then what we are doing in terms of new investments? Because you talked a little bit about how departments are reinvesting or recategorizing. Are we going to be able to see that?
I think you should be able to see it in the detail. I mean, it will take some going through all the I mean, it's not kind of clearly laid out, this is a particular line item savings. There is, as you know, at the front page of each of the departmental chapters, there's the ins and outs page. I can't remember what the summary page is, but it shows kind of where some of the savings are. But it also won't show kind of the adjustments within each program.
Do you not think that in light of the fact that we're going to performance-based budgeting and we want to show people outcomes, that we should be establishing some departmental goals?
The goals are laid out. It's not, I don't think it takes a little bit of going through each department's programs to understand how they've shifted the resources, but we can sit with you and go through those.
Well, I just think, again, for more transparency, I think if we're telling folks that this is the only way we're going to be able to get to your budget plan, then I think it behooves us to show folks that we have in fact established some savings departmentally, and then we've made choices about how we reinvest it, right?
Yeah.
Your budget plan is your priorities, right?
That's right.
So I think it's only fair that we now begin to demonstrate to folks that in fact we are using a savings tool, and then we're making the choices around reinvestments, right?
Yep.
In light of and Rob, you talked a little bit about this. Do we measure what our debt ratio has been? I know when we went to AVI, our debt rate capacity increased. Are we monitoring our debt ratio, like by department, where we're making investments with our capital? How, the school district has gotten to a point where they now have every school carrying its debt ratio, right, for its bonds. Do we have a capacity to do that?
We look at our debt ratio in two ways. One, the constitutional debt ratio, and as you said, because of what's happened with assessments, that has less meaning than it did before. And then we look at our debt as a percent of expenditures and a percent of revenues. And we that's the target we measure against. Okay. We don't do a building by building analysis.
Okay. One of the things as we get prepared to talk tomorrow about our 5-year plan, one of the things in our comp plan, we're required to show year for year when we borrow and when we spend. And in our 5-year plan, we continuously do this huge carryover, and then we borrow more money. In the 5-year plan, it is very hard for us to look at how much are we borrowing, what's our spend capacity, and is there a need to continue to borrow when we have these large carryovers? And so, tomorrow I'd like to see us get to a place where we could really look at what our spend capacity is and our borrowing, and then looking at our what is our debt ratio.
Yeah, and we borrow on a cash basis, so we borrow when we have.
So then why the big carryover every year?
So the carry forward is carry forward appropriations rather than carry forward cash. So we only borrow when our cash reserves are running low, and then that's when we go out to the market and borrow for the capital program. The carry forward is carry forward appropriations to allow departments to complete projects from prior year appropriations. It's not cash.
Okay, but so how do we monitor? I mean, is there a matrix for when we're looking, particularly as it relates to capital spending, kind of the management, the soft cost, construction, delay, how do we see that? There's no way in our we have a very robust capital plan. It's $10.8 billion. Very robust.
Yes.
So what I'd like to see is how are we going to manage those investment pieces?
And we absolutely can talk about that tomorrow. Some of that is that when we look, so as we prepare the budget, part of what we look at, both us, the Budget Office, and the City Planning Commission, as we work on putting together the capital program, is to look at capacity also within the departments to be able to handle these projects. And so it is both kind of the critical need of funding these issues that we need to solve. We need to fix these facilities, we need to purchase the vehicles, but we also look at the capacity of the departments to be able to handle it. So part of even included in the 5-year plan in the operating budget are things like positions to be able to support the capital program, to be able to expand the capacity of the departments to be able to handle it. We'd like to move away from the point where we have all this carry forward appropriations continuing. And so we want to make sure that departments have the capacity to handle the resources or the appropriations that they're given relatively quickly, so that we get to a point where we've spent down those carry forward appropriations and are using those resources effectively.
So you're able to tell people spend capacity, timeline, how many people stay on timeline?
Yeah,
so if I asked you for a capital report right now of everything that we have outstanding, you'll be able to tell me how many of those are on time, delayed?
It will take us, to every single project, it will take us some time to do but yes, we know, so public property manages many of the department's spending levels. They have very detailed project plans for the police department, the fire department, and many other departments that they can go through. And when we put the capital budget together and the capital program, we try and make sure that they have the resources at the right time to be able to continue those projects. So yes, we work pretty closely with the departments to make sure that we're funding we never can do enough. As you all know, we never do enough, but can we make sure that we're funding appropriately on the right time level of when they need those resources?
I'm looking at managing projects, right? And I know public property has gotten really good as they've
Yes.
standardized kitchens and other stuff.
Absolutely.
But I'm looking at, again, do we have a matrix for how much we spend on management versus soft costs versus construction versus, when we have overruns? And I say this because we're always delayed on projects,
Yeah,
right?
and-
And so, part of our questioning around operating budget is one thing, but also on our capital expenditure, we're carrying these debt ratios, and are we being prudent in how we spend that?
Yeah, and we try to be very careful about, as we add appropriations, of the timeline, so we're not, I think previously there was a kind of a thought that departments would like to kind of bank appropriations and they could finally spend it after 5 years of getting a certain amount of appropriations, they could finally spend it on a project. We're trying to change that, so we're giving them the appropriations when they need it for the timeline of that project. Each department's projects are also so different from one another. So streets projects on repaving look very different from a facility improvement at police. So we can work with you on how you'd like to see this displayed, but we can definitely give you information of projects and timelines and for each department and the specifics. So we can work with your office to come up with a model that would help you.
And I know tomorrow we'll
look at
get
this.
into that. I just want us to be better prepared to respond to that. I have a number of projects that are 2, 3, 4 years delayed. And
Understood.
so I'd like to see us at a place where we can monitor that. I think there's some costs related to that, because the more we delay projects, the more they cost. So, right, when I did a 10-year plan for Parks and Rec, it cost one thing. Now, 10 years later, it's exponentially much higher because we weren't able to, and we've been moving those projects.
Yes.
I've been seeing both public property and our Parks and Rec. I like to see it on some of the capital improvements in the neighborhood where some of these projects are very delayed. And I think there's a cost issue to that.
No, I agree.
Not to mention the premium and
Yes,
and
I
the
agree. I
labor
mean,
costs.
if a project is delayed, it definitely adds costs. Yes.
Okay, I'll
Thank-
wait
thank-
for my next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with what has just been said because I have some long-term projects as well that we'd like to see get funded. And I agree with my colleagues, most of which has said the public can't afford and don't want this increase in real estate taxes, and we totally agree. I also like the idea, of course, of taking it from the parking tax. You know I love that idea. But certainly, we agree also that, especially since we're taking back control of the school district, we need to, when we see a bill, we need to see a program. That's also been said by several of my colleagues as well. We will also control the school board, and we're not prepared to fund issues that don't improve learning and where we don't know what it means just to fund a line item or a cost. We're not prepared to do that. So certainly we want to see, and we say that too for those who deal with the budget as well, when you ask for money, we want to see the program, what that money will certainly provide. The last thing I'd like to say is that we've been meeting with, several people have contacted us, unions who talk about that they're in negotiations with the city. They talk about not knowing where they are with pension. We had some people who came to us talking about they make $7.20 an hour starting, and that they should be up with other city workers who earn a living. So would you comment with regard to contracts where we are and with regard to people in the city not all earning the same salary?
So we take you through where we are with every union. So with 33, we have a contract. We entered in that last year. The FOP, we had an arbitration award that came out last year also. We had 2 new arbitration awards last week, or the week before, for correctional officers and deputy sheriffs. It's about, I guess, maybe 60% of our employees who are in new contracts that have some type of pension reform. You asked specifically about pensions. We still have ongoing discussions with District Council 47. We've gone through the arbitration process with fire, and we're waiting to get an award from the panel.
Do we expect that to work out with 47? Is that toward the end of working it out?
We hope so.
And
Yeah.
also, we shouldn't have city workers who make $7.20 an hour starting off. Then they work 6 months or a year and they get up to $8.50, which is still way below city workers. Where are we on those?
Yeah, I thought that we had actually raised everybody's salary to $12.20 an hour. If there's someone who thinks there are examples where we haven't done that, we'd like to know about it. So, yeah, we can talk after. We can talk outside the
Thank you.
hearing.
I understand. I know you have food service and workers at the airport who have said they started.
Oh, not city employees?
7. They work for the city. They said they work for the city, but they're making very low.
Okay, let's talk about that because. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
And I love the budget process. It's awesome, right? This is
Happiest time of the year.
It is, and I think people look a little different when we start from when we finish, but it is definitely where we earn our money all the way around and come up with solutions to get to the same end, and it's helping the citizens of the city of Philadelphia. So I have a few questions. Let me just start off with the local takeover of our school district and from the state and its fiduciary responsibility. Can you just shed clarity on that are we more responsible, less responsible, or are we the same when it comes to funding our schools under local control? Because I think there's some confusion about it. Maybe it's confusing my question. All right, but now that we're going to have local control, does that mean we accept more financial responsibility, or do we not?
Yeah, I think that, the mayor made it pretty clear when he came here to city council to sort of explain that he wanted to move to local control, understanding that it would be irresponsible to do that without understanding that with control comes the responsibility of, ensuring financial stability. At the same time, I think the mayor's made very clear that this does not mean that the state does not have a commitment to adequately fund education, but we in looking through the process, understood that in the short term that the city would need to increase its commitment, but over the long term we would have to continue to work with our partners in Harrisburg for continued funding there in the same way that other districts across the Commonwealth are looking for increased funding as well.
And I think the reason why I even ask that, and it's not to put the mayor or you or anybody else on the spot, is since 2011 and 18, this body has shown its commitment to the school district and its local share, increasing it by $400 million. And, the proposed $900 million over the length of the next 5 years as submitted to City Council and the mayor's budget. So I think, the city certainly is committed.
Yep.
The point I'm trying to make out or point out, the state and federal funding is a total of 54% of the annual school district budget. Is that correct? Approximately.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
About 54% of the school funding comes from the state and federal or other sources.
Yeah.
And okay.
We will, through this budget, we would become the largest funder, right, Rob?
I think it's close, but I think there's
yeah,
still.
Well, I mean, it is close, right?
Yeah,
It
but I mean,
would-
to
right.
your earlier point, I think we've
Over
always
the
recognized
length
that City
of
Council has
the
stepped up
5-year
over the last few years in a way that has not always happened in the state. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So the city
So
has
it's a recognition
stepped up.
of that
The
and a
state,
faith in that.
hence the constitutional argument in the Supreme Court for fair funding for schools across the Commonwealth. But I'm worried about the city of Philadelphia, all right, because we have been worried about our local share. And if the state Supreme Court does rule in favor of fair funding. Would we come back and revisit some of our local share, or would it just kind of supplement? I mean, I know it's all kind of subjective, you know, at this point, you know, but, you know, would we consider taking a look at where we are funding-wise?
I think of course we would be taking a look at that. I think that also we would be just, you know, sort of looking at what the district investments are. You know, I've made the comment earlier that we don't believe that this necessarily gets towards adequacy. And so we believe that there is room for more investment, but it would really have to depend on what, you know, when that point in time comes, we would be able to look at programs that we're currently funding in the district, areas where we might see improved services that the city's providing through departments that the district can then reinvest in other things, and then that on top of it. So I think we would take a look at it holistically at that time, and you know, there might be some changes. And that would be a good thing. Yeah, and I think it might be more about providing better quality education.
And if that does happen, we would do that publicly.
Yeah.
Right, and in the open and have hearings on that. Is the city speaking with the state when, you know, obviously we're talking about additional state funding, about state reimbursements for our charter schools?
Yeah, we had conversations with different members of the delegation about that, different members of Republican leadership with the governor about that, but don't see any fast movement on that in the next year.
Well, is there anything that we could do as a city, as a legislative body, as our resources and our friends in the activist community and in the business community, you know, the Chamber of Commerce, it'd be nice to see them, you know, champion for charter school reimbursement and so forth. Is there something that we can do collectively as a one collaborative unit, you know, to ask the multiple, ask the state to reimburse?
Yeah, so I think that that's probably something that's on the agenda for next year altogether, to be having that conversation, you know, once we sort of get past the move to local control and figure out our agenda for funding for next year from the state.
Now, in the 5-year plan, I do notice, well, everybody here can see that the projected base growth for the wage tax, approximately $300 million, I guess, over the 5-year plan. Do you have a sense of where that growth is in job sectors? And if you don't know it now, I mean, I'm not, you know, I really don't, this isn't the time to get into the nitty gritty, but would you be able to provide that when we, you know, go through this budget process?
Yeah, we work with our outside forecasting consultant, and I'm sure we can get you a kind of growth by sector, if that's what you're talking about, kind of the general kind of growth of each by kind of NIAC code, kind of how those things work.
Next code, right.
Yes,
I mean,
we can do that.
That's fine. I mean, so that would be helpful because, you know, as we go through and sift through this budget thoroughly, as we all do, and we do it together, and we, you know, some of the things when we take a look at some of the crosstabs and the real finite details, you know, we don't have to, you know, put ourselves in positions to do one-offs, right? Like that legislation that really impede some of the growth. And what I mean by that is, let me ask, we will be asking, I think as a body, is there an affordable housing plan, all right, moving forward? What does that look like? Can we do that without further taxes or increases? And if we see an increase in the wage tax as seen over the 5-year, you know, approximately $300 million, are there reasons to look and touch things that are on the books that, you know, may have unintended consequences? And I'm going to be specific, like the 10-year tax abatement and or anything else, you know, when it comes to development, when we're seeing an increase in these growth. While, you know, providing homestead protections. Now, on the record, any property assessed of $400,000 and less with a $45,000 homestead will see a decrease, as submitted. We'll see a decrease in their taxes?
With the revised proposal.
The revised.
For property that was valued at $400,000 or less and didn't see a change in its assessed value, their tax bill would go down.
Good.
Under this proposal.
Yeah. So all that needs to come together, but I would like to see an affordable housing plan moving forward, especially when there has been some conversation about taking a look at some one-off and other legislations that will be in front of us at the same time. I just want to make sure that it's in sync and there's continuity as we move forward and there's no unintended consequences.
Understood.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I think everybody has had their first round. I'd like to, if you guys will bear with me, Mr. Munson is here from the school district, and without getting into any broad-based testimonies and questioning, because I know they do have their time, but Mr. Munson, if you could just come up and there were a couple of key questions relating to the school district, and I'd ask my colleagues to not get into any full-blown level of questioning, but the most significant one was the issue with respect to the adjustment of the mayor's budget, particularly around increased assessments and the change in the rate, and has the school district, which plan was put in place or proposed prior to those changes and adjustments as it relates to the aforementioned. Have you had an opportunity to review and adjust the school district's budget and 5-year plan? And 2, if you did, what is it and where's your baseline? Has it changed your need to deal with the deficit issues? That's a long question, but you know where I'm getting at.
I like essay questions. Good afternoon.
And then one last thing. I'm sorry, Mr. Munson. It was another issue with respects to school district's ability to live within its budget, to look at potential limitations on expenditures. And I know you have to leave because you have something you have to do. And I asked about capital, and I think that might be problematic for tomorrow. So if you could just lay it out, and then we can kind of
Thank you.
I just wanted to get, because every third question is about school district funding. So.
I understand. Good afternoon. Ori Monson, Chief Financial Officer for the school district. I'll try and get to each part of the essay question.
Thank you.
We have the overall total number estimate from the city, which is about $14 million less than the previous proposal over the 5 years. We don't have the details of it yet. We know, we were told as much as what was set out publicly about what the different pieces would be, but until we see the underlying data of how the assessment increase rolls in, how it will affect things like UNO, how it will affect all the pieces, we just don't have the kind of detail to do the analysis. And I've heard some of the questions that were asked. Once we have that data, we'll do that. We'll have to put out a revised 5-year plan. Obviously, we just put it out Thursday night based on the previous proposal.
Right.
But we'll be able to do that and then be able to answer all the questions. So we'll need, I don't want to overcommit my staff, but a few days once we get the data to kind of run it through, and we'll be happy to come back and share. We can share with council, share it publicly. We'll want to put it out through the SRC. So that, because we have our own budget hearings in April as well, so we want the public to be able to comment on it as well. So as soon as we can get it, we will process through and get it out to everybody.
That would be helpful. Yeah, we want to, at the end of the day, work off the same numbers as we deliberate around this initial request and then the secondary request for increases in revenue. Mm-hmm. Then I know Councilman Dom had asked a question, particularly around cost-saving measures and things that can be done internally. And I know just generally we can
sure.
get it. Then you'll come back and we'll get more detail.
This is like a preview for May for us. We take our fiduciary responsibility very seriously and have been doing measured investments over time as we come back from the cuts from 6 years ago. In terms of using our money wisely, everything from the fact that our central office represents less than 3.5% of our total operating budget, which is about half what other large urban districts are. We were able to do a year and a half ago a refinancing of $1.3 billion in outstanding debt at lower interest rates, save $100 million that way. Our good financial stewardship and management got us the first bond rating upgrade in 6 years. We did a bond sale on Thursday, and not to get into the weeds too much, but basically because the interest spread, which a year and a half ago was 125 basis points, because of our good financial stewardship, is now it's set with 72 basis points. It saved about $18.6 million in interest over the life. And our goal is obviously the more money we save on interest, less going to the investors, more going into the schools. And that's been our primary goal, is how we can invest more in the schools. And the literacy coaches, updating high school labs, modernizing classrooms, all those which are starting to see effects. As you know, our reading at grade level for third grade increased 5% last year. All of our test scores were up for the statewide tests. Our attendance rates are up and are the highest they've been in at least 6 years. So we're seeing incremental progress. We want to do more, and that's really the goal. Is to one of the philosophies we have is we don't, because of the way education works, you can't do an investment 1 year and then pull it back out a year. It's not fair to the kids. We're trying to build steadily, so not put nurses and counselors back and then take them out, but be able to put nurses and counselors and expand the number of counselors, expand the number of behavioral supports and the climate supports in the schools. Take the literacy program, and one of our proposals based on the Thursday night was to take where we've been successful K through 3, expand the literacy investments into 4 and 5 to increase the rate of the modernization of our K through 3 classrooms. So with the funds we borrowed and with some operating support, do about 150 elementary classrooms this summer. So it's continued measured investment, but I think we're do pretty well with managing the money. I won't say we're as efficient, as effective as we could be, but I think we're doing pretty well.
Okay, thank you. All right, you'll, as soon as you get an adjustment associated with the new numbers, if you can make that available to the members of council, it will be very helpful. We don't want to, like we normally do, wait to the last minute. It would be good. I actually heard this morning on KYW or something, State Representative Brown, I believe, the appropriations chair in Harrisburg, said that they anticipated that Harrisburg would finish on time this year.
I heard that too.
You hear that?
Yeah.
I had to, I'm like, are you kidding me? Oh, yes, right. It's an election year. Wow.
Yes.
Right. But, it's nothing wrong with actually, getting to a conclusion and a consensus early on in the process. So the sooner we can get all our numbers aligned, the better we'll be. And I had talked, you weren't here, but we were suggesting that as we move ahead, as the school board comes back local, that at a minimum, the school district can have people, and I know ultimately Dr. Height will have to make that decision, that it can be a part of this process, because a lot of questions come up relating to school districts, and now that it's in our lap, we may want to have some people here from the school district to kind of monitor the questions so we can be prepared as we move through the process.
We'll definitely make an effort starting immediately, obviously, to have someone available to track the questions at the very least, so that we can be better prepared for the hearing in May, which is school district focused, so we can kind of be prepared to address all those issues at the time, even if we can't address them right as they come up. Part of it is just with our own school budget process, which we're going through right now. We don't have the details of how each school is using the funds, which we know is usually part of the discussion, and we really don't have that until April.
Right, okay. But you can get the adjusted numbers associated with it.
As soon as we have it, we'll be able to run it through and be able to, yes, the 30,000-foot picture we'll be able to do.
We appreciate you. Thank you very much. You want to stay? I mean, like what?
That's a later question.
If
you're telling me I can go?
Yeah,
thank you very much.
I think you better go. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Mr. Munson. I appreciate you. Back to business at hand. I just had a couple of more questions. Getting back to the taxes. One, kind of annual question. Before, and I know members of council have to some degree and probably are still doing this, before you made a determination on having to raise taxes, because real estate is always the sweet spot, if you have to raise revenue. Had you all looked at any other alternatives or other opportunities to raise any levels of significant revenue before you came to the conclusion of the first 6, now 4.5% tax increase?
Yeah, we actually had...
Can you tell me what they are?
We had lots of discussions about what to do, and it's kind of why we wound up with a package of things, so that no one area would get too much of the brunt of the increase. So that's why we're including the slowdown in the wage tax reduction, why we included a transfer tax component, why we increased the city's general fund contribution. All that was kind of an attempt to make sure that the property tax increase wasn't as large as some people had feared. But that was kind of, that's how we put the package together.
That's just adjusting existing revenue sources. I mean, and I don't, but on the record, I don't agree with slowing down the wage tax, because ever since I've been a councilman, I've always been told that was the worst tax in the world. We had to reduce it. Now we're still slowing down. I understand.
We're still reducing it.
We
still have $130 million of wage and business tax reductions in the plan, which is actually one of our biggest investments in the plan.
We hope our friends from Amazon are okay with that when they come here.
I think they would appreciate an investment in schools, so I think it is something that they would like.
I'm just saying, it's inconsistent with what I've heard forever. So, but have we looked at anything outside, basically, have we gone outside the box?
Yeah, we did. We looked at any opportunity to increase non-tax revenues, so we looked at fees and fines, and there are some increases throughout the budget in fees and fines that helped kind of at least offset our costs, that helped us be able to contribute the $20 million a year. So that was part of what we looked at. One of the questions we knew would come up was, what's the impact of the homestead? So we went through a selection process and have a vendor now looking at the homestead to see, the abatement. That's why there was a blank look in your face. What you talking about? The abatement, yes. Look at the abatement and what the impact of that is. That should be done by the end of April, so that by the time we get into, time we have our revenue hearing, we have that information and can see kind of what various changes in the abatement would mean. So that's kind of another area that we looked at.
You hire a consultant to look at that?
Yes.
I know you did? Okay.
We did, yes.
Right.
And one of the things that we've talked to the consultant about is meeting during the preparation process, meeting with council members, if council members are interested, to get ideas for different scenarios to look at for potential changes to abatements. So, we're happy to do that.
Okay. You guys can come up with it. We'll look at your recommendation. Okay. So, taxes, rate. You look at the $400,000 threshold. Does that include the 11% increases in assessment? Is that number still the same?
It does not. That includes a property that had the same assessment in both years.
Right.
We looked at kind of what it would mean at different areas of property value. For the median value, which is about $128,000, if you had a 9% increase in your assessment, you'd have basically, that would be your break-even point. So kind of what will happen with specific property owners will depend on what happens with their assessment, right? So, and there's a wide range. There are a significant number of properties that will see either a decline or no increase, and obviously a significant number that will see an increase, and some that will see increases above the 11%. So it'll be kind of a wide variety of, what it'll mean for specific properties.
But is the $400,000 threshold include the 11%?
No, I said no.
Right,
that was my first part of my response was no, it does
I want
not.
to stay focused on that. So assuming that that does not include that, then that particular $400,000 number could potentially go down.
Yes.
In terms of the threshold.
That's what I'm saying. It will depend on what happens with the particular assessment. So for every property, it's going to be different.
So at what point will we know what the new threshold will be? Because it sounds like you're agreeing that it won't be $400,000.
I'm saying $400,000 is same value both years.
But that's not going to be the same value.
I know, but there's no specific number because, so if you had just 11%.
You throw out the specific number based on your.
If you had an 11% increase, then that's going to be somewhere in the $120,000 range.
Right.
But there aren't going to be lots of properties that just get an 11% increase. So while that has meaning kind of as a global number, for specific properties, that doesn't have meaning. What will have meaning for them is what percent increase their property got.
Yeah, I understand that. But my concern is when you throw a number out there, and you've now said $400,000 is the threshold, and people hear that, and now the assumption is that, oh, okay, we can move ahead because most people's properties are not $400,000. But if that's not the real number, then at some point we need to know what the real number is and when you determine how many properties are actually going to experience a higher number regardless of what the homestead ends up being.
Yep.
So that would be helpful to us.
Yeah, and what we've put together and we can share with you is at different assessed values, kind of what the break-even point is in terms of a percentage increase in assessment, and we can provide that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. We have the stuff on there. Let me see now. It should be Councilman Green, right? Yeah. Thing is moved around. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Just to follow up on that line of questioning, so you will be able to provide information.
I'm sorry, Councilman. I'm sorry. I didn't see Councilman Squilla come in. He didn't get an opportunity. Okay. So, Councilman Squilla, you jumped the line. So.
All right. I'm sorry. Yes. Sorry for being here late. My question is on the assessment, and I know when we first did AVI, they told us they would be assessing every year. Correct. So because of appeals and other things, they weren't able to do that. And then they wanted to hit the land values and then commercial properties, but still look at other properties. So now we had 11% this year. What's to say we're not going to have another 8% next year or the year after?
So that will really depend on what happens with the growth of values. And so if there's really rapid growth in values, you would see strong increases in assessments. If that growth is slow, you would see that. I mean, that's what will determine the growth, what's happening with values.
Exactly. So if the assessments are going up and we're looking to raise the factor, which is the rate, next year, though, that if their assessments continue the way they're going, as we see development and increase in values, do we see a percentage in our 5-year plan that we're budgeting for increased assessments?
Yeah, we assume about a 3% annual growth in assessments.
And so this year was an anomaly of 11%?
This year was stronger than we anticipated. I mean, if it's not an anomaly and we see 11% a year, then that will put us in a different position, and we'll have to kind of re-examine what we're proposing.
Okay, I'm just saying because, I mean, if we're looking at it that way, it's very possible that next year could be just as much or higher. So that would also be challenging for the taxpayer, whether it's the homestead was increased this year or not.
Right, and that's part of the reason that we increased the homestead, and part of what we did too. Once we saw that values had come in higher than we anticipated, we adjusted our proposal to try to take that into account.
Understood.
Both on the rate side and on the homestead side.
And that's part of the problem. I mean, doing a budget before having those numbers is difficult, right?
It is, yes.
So is there a way to work with OPA to get those numbers in before you submit a budget?
So the challenge is there's a state deadline that's the end of March, and the earlier OPA does the numbers, the staler they are by the time they have to be certified and by the time that they're actually used for tax purposes. So that's the challenge, and that's why we don't get them earlier.
But they do have some idea, I would imagine, where that number will come in at
So they look at properties kind of individually. They don't look at it globally, so they don't have a great view of kind of what the totals will be. So they'll try to give us some sense, but I mean, it's not what their focus is. Their focus is getting the individual assessments right.
I just want you to see the challenge it is for council to be able to look at a rate change, knowing the assessment values of the following year. And if you're looking at 3% as in your 5-year plan and it's 5, 10, or 15%, that additional revenue is something that we like, but to make that change immediately in this year, looking at projecting to 5 years, is very difficult for us also.
Right. But it could also be, 2%. It could be less than 3% next year. There's kind of no guarantee of that.
And there's no guarantee that whatever rate we come up with will be able to cover the cost of this year's budget.
Well, this year, I mean, we have assessments, so we know what we're dealing with. Obviously, the further you go into the future, the less we know that assessment growth will actually hit our projections.
And what is the percentage of appeal rate loss do you have?
You assume 25%.
You assume 25% of the
Yes.
11% increase?
Yes.
And that's where you come up with the 4.1%.
Yes. Yes.
And since we can't raise the real estate in order to increase the homestead, is that increase being done by the transfer tax?
Correct.
So the transfer tax will cover the total amount of the homestead?
The school district portion
The school district portion?
Yes.
And the city portion is just being
is already in our fund balances.
by the fund balance?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And you can hear the questions on OPA. If you can provide, when OPA comes in here, we can get a little more specific on the increases, per year, percentage-wise, instead of going from 0 to 11, or, if it's a steady, just when OPA comes, just a little more detail.
Got it, yeah.
We're not going to get into it today, but I think the councilman was on to, how a lot of this body feels and some of the information that we could actually, discuss.
And I think that they can probably talk about market in general and where they see the market going. I don't think they'll be able to say, 3 years from now, we think that it'll be 4% as opposed to 3%. I don't think they really will see that until they get into their assessment process.
And that's fine. I mean, we, as the councilman started off, we projected an annual 3% increase in property values. Even if it went down to 2%, it would have been a sort of a steady
understood.
thing. And then Councilman Johnson asked for a district breakdown. That would be great. Councilman, Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to follow up on some of the questions the Council President was asking in reference to the break-even levels. And with the 11% increase in the property assessments, you'll be able to provide to this by the number of households that will represent?
Yes. Yes.
You were kind of equivocating, so.
I was kind of thinking of the
yes,
way,
no.
because I was thinking of the way to do it, and yes, we can do that.
Okay. Wait, are you anticipating, or are you trying to contemplate how that information will be presented? I'm trying to get some perspective on why you were hesitating.
I was trying to think of the information that we have, and thinking of the way that we have, I think we can do that, yes.
Okay. We're spending a lot of time talking about, I know the administration spent a lot of time talking about the homestead exemption, and initial proposal was increasing by 10,000. Now we're talking about increasing by 15,000. How many people currently in the city have taken advantage of homestead exemptions?
I think it's about 220,000 properties have homestead exemptions.
And what's the gap of people who have not taken advantage of the homestead exemption?
So that's probably about 70% of the people who should have it. So there's still a number of people who should have it. And one of the things we've talked about is expanding our outreach to make sure that we get more people signed up.
You're reading my mind, just like the earned income tax credit, which I know Councilman Dom often talks about. What type of resources, which I haven't seen any information regarding resources being devoted to getting information out regarding the homestead exemption, especially when you're talking about a real estate tax increase.
Yeah, and we can get you more information on that and what kind of outreach we're doing and how we'll try to increase participation.
Right, but what dollars are being allocated? What's the plan? I mean, that's something that the administration talked about early on, and if you're looking at that as a way to try to offset this increase, I think it's really incumbent upon the administration to really, in a full-throated way, explain to people what is the homestead exemption and why, one, they should have been taking advantage of it before, but more importantly, they should be taking advantage of it, especially when you're talking about a real estate tax increase, when we've had significant amount of increases over the years, and a number of constituents are concerned because of them being on a fixed income.
Agree, yep. We agree, and we'll get you that information.
Okay, so when will that information be provided to council? Is that the next week, 2 weeks? Marketing plan, rollout, dollars allocated?
We can get it for you actually during the finance hearing next week.
Okay, so by the finance hearings next week?
Yeah.
Okay, and that will also include the amount of dollars associated with that outreach?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, all right. A couple of other questions. I believe on page 2 when we were talking about assessments, and I know there was a assessment court challenge. My question is, what is the current status of litigation, and will that have any impact on this new assessment proposal?
I was looking for the city solicitor, and luckily he was coming.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Marcel Pratt, Acting City Solicitor. So the case is still pending. There was an injunction request that was filed by a group of taxpayers to prohibit the collection of taxes from them. That was denied by the court. Right now, the case is in discovery. There's no predicting when the case will be resolved, but that's sort of where things stand.
But we have not, and this actually may be a question for Finance Director, we have not put together any type of reserve for the assessment court challenge.
So the reserve for federal funding that you talked about is kind of built out of that, the additional revenues from the increase in the assessed values last year. So if we lost the court case, we would lose probably 1 year of that reserve.
Yeah, it's possible. It depends on what remedies the court orders. But at this time, we don't think that's likely to happen.
And that's based on the current status of litigation, and because it was denied, that you believe will be successful?
No, I think that's based on the strength of our arguments in the case and the court's ruling so far.
Okay. I think the bell's rung, so I just have one other question, and this kind of ties into, I think, some of the questions that Councilman Heenan raised regarding the William Penn lawsuit versus the William Penn et al. Versus the Pennsylvania Department of Education. I know that litigation is pending, but it makes me think of the impact, and Finance Director DeBoe talked about the impact on the pension fund. You know, PCERS has gone from like 5.6% of salary to 33.4% of salary, which is a major impact on our school funding. What steps have we taken to either work with other school districts to address this issue regarding the school employees' retirement system?
I think that's probably a question for the district. I don't have those details. So, I mean, we can talk to them and...
I understand it's a question for the district, but, you know, part of this $905 million deficit by FY23, a large portion of that comes from the perspective that their pension costs have gone up dramatically. So not only is it a district issue, but it's also an administration and council issue, because we're being asked upon, and the citizens have been asked upon, to provide additional resources to deal with one of these fixed costs. And I would venture that other school districts and other cities around the Commonwealth are also dealing with this issue. So has there been any initiative to work with other cities, other jurisdictions, municipalities, work with our General Assembly to look at this issue in a way not just based from a Harrisburg perspective, but of a local perspective, not just the City of Philadelphia, but other cities around the Commonwealth?
Right, and I know that they have worked with people on this issue. I just don't know the details. That's why I wanted to get back to you on it.
I just think it's incumbent when you look at, and you talked, when you were talking with Councilman O about the fixed costs of the school district, and I agree they have been doing a better job. That's why their credit rating has been upgraded in reference to managing resources. But when you look at the huge increase in fixed costs, both from charter schools as well as pensions, that's something that we need to have a more holistic perspective engaging in, just not rely on other people to do so, because that's part of the major reason why we need to, why people are asking, what administration is asking for a property tax increase.
Yep, and as you say, the pension issue is kind of a statewide issue that was driven by, decisions that the legislature made in Harrisburg.
But being it a statewide issue, and we are the only city of the first class in the Commonwealth, I think it would be incumbent upon us to take some leadership on this issue, working with our General Assembly, working with other cities, cities of second class, third class, who are also having similar type of issues, not only at the local level from pensions, but also from the school districts. And I think this is something we can't just defer to others, especially considering we're being asked to make the hard decision of doing a property tax increase for our constituents.
Understood.
So can you give us some type of timeline or plan of when you anticipate trying to work on that?
We'll get back to you during this process. We'll talk to the district and we'll get back to you.
And I have another question, but my bell is rung, so I'll come back later.
Councilman, if it's okay, we're trying to get through our second round and then
Right,
go
that's
to
why
the
I deferred.
Okay,
Right.
great. Thank you. Councilman, Chair recognizes Councilman Dom, and for the record, we are now on a 5-minute time for each member to, try to get their questions in. We're going to be taking a little bit of a break.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of quick questions. Do we have an idea what in 2018, fiscal year 2018, what our overtime costs might be?
We do. We actually, I think we're both looking for the same document. It's included in our quarterly reports.
That's exactly what I was looking for.
And I got hers first.
See if I can find it.
So in effort of time, while
18,
we got it?
total, our projection is that we will spend $169.4 million in overtime in FY18.
169?
169.4 million.
How does that compare to last year?
So the actual in FY17 was 158.9 million. And then in 16, it was 170.8 million.
Okay. Are we doing anything proactively to try to manage that down?
Yes, we work, there's a few things that we do. Some of this is trying to understand, the first thing we do is kind of understand what's going on with departments overtime. Sometimes it's related to staffing challenges, that there's fewer staff than they had anticipated, and so therefore overtime has gone up. In other instances, it could be related that there are unanticipated cost drivers. For example, in police, I don't think anybody had anticipated the sheer number or volume of protests that we are now facing. So it varies pretty dramatically by department as to what the drivers are. So we, on a quarterly basis, get data from the departments about new projections, explanations for any changes that are happening in their overtime costs, and we meet with them to figure out what is the appropriate level. Sometimes using overtime makes a lot more sense than hiring additional staff. Other times it's just a drag. We're not able to provide as much services or improve our services by the fact that we have a staffing shortage and therefore we have to use overtime. So it really varies by department, but yes, we have a process that we set up, which also we then report out to PICA on with each department and their overtime spend.
You have here in this budget, you have an amount of $225 million for the union contracts.
That's right.
And we negotiated, I guess, recently one contract with the FOP that totaled more than the budget amount originally that we had set aside. Do you think this 225 is going to be enough for the remaining contracts?
I think if we included everything that could potentially come in that contract, it would potentially set a floor for negotiations, and so we think this is something that's sort of a fair, realistic number.
And in the Economy League report that I just read, it says that job creation in Philadelphia slowed down in 2017, which I was not aware of. Are you forecasting that in these projections?
So our jobs project. So we don't assume. I don't think we assume the same level of growth. We assume a certain amount of growth. And I'm just going to turn to the page in our 5-year plan where we talk about our expectations of growth in the economy. I think we work with IHS, which is our outside consulting firm, to look at local employment, regional employment, and national employment, because all of which affects our wage tax, as well as generally the economy. And I can get you kind of a breakdown of what they assume in terms of job growth each year. I think I have I don't have the document with me that shows kind of that growth, but I think we basically are assuming fairly cautiously optimistic growth. We're having a very strong year this year in terms of wage tax. We don't anticipate that we maintain that strength in wage tax throughout the plan. We aren't sure about how the federal tax changes have impacted businesses and wages, and the fact that we know that there were some firms that gave out fairly large bonuses in January, and so therefore it's not kind of part of our base growth, but we're seeing a kind of a really strong year. So I think, but we can send you exactly kind of our projections over the 5-year plan, and you'll see those growth rates.
Thank you. Next time, though, I only need 3-word answers. Thank you.
I'll do my best.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you. Okay, so just a couple of quick questions. The first is slowing of the wage tax. And so I know you talked about it briefly, but the mayor said in his budget address that he was proposing readjusting the scheduled reductions in the wage tax. And I'm wondering if you could give us something a little more concrete in terms of what that actually is, what that really means, in terms of what the plan projections are and what the new projections are?
Yeah, so under the projections in the plan, the wage tax rate should go from 3.89 to 3.84% over the 5 years. That cost to the plan is about $88 million.
About what?
$88 million over the plan.
And the previous reductions were going to?
3.7. Yeah, 3.7 last year's plan.
Okay. Also, Jane, according to your testimony on page 3, out of the 2,700 pre-K slots that we have available now, thanks to the Early Childhood Education Initiative, can you tell me how many are 3- and 4-star slots and how many are 1- and 2-star slots? Originally, we were told that they'd all be high quality, which was translated into the 3- and 4-star slots. And just recently, I was informed that a number of these slots are 1- and 2 slots. And so if you could give us some sort of a sense of the number citywide, because this was sold as high quality early childhood education. The difference between having a babysitter and an early childhood instructor who was going to do, prepare them so that they hit kindergarten very well prepared.
Yep.
And so I just want to be clear on that, because it's something that people were expecting, that these were all going to be 3- and 4-star.
Yeah, and I'll pass it over to Otis and Julie, but always wanted to make sure that in addition to providing that quality education, that we were helping more providers increase the quality of the education that they were able to provide.
Sure.
Because when we do that, we not only are able to provide quality education to all the kids that we're funding in those programs, but then you're lifting all those other kids up by providing that. But
I think
I'm going to pass it over to them
Yeah.
for the actual numbers.
I just want to say that I think that's great, but that's not what we told people we were doing. So I just think we need to, and if that's the message and that's what,
Which
was a part of the original
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing as well, but we have to be
Yeah, you want to make sure we
consistent.
don't have kids who are staying in programs that aren't improving their quality.
Absolutely.
Right, good afternoon, Otis Hackney, Chief Education Officer for the city. Thank you for your question. Yes, and I think Jane kind of hit on some of the points, the talking points around, the work and efforts that we've put forward with trying to increase quality seats by lifting up a number of providers. And I think Julie's going to share some more numbers in terms of the number of providers that we've actually increased and improved to increase the number of seats or children sitting in quality programs.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Beeman. I'm the PHL Pre-K Director. Currently, we have 86 sites in the PHL Pre-K network. From the beginning of the program in January 2017, 22 of those sites have improved to Star 3. So originally, we started out with 39 Star 1 and Star 2 providers.
I'm sorry, slow down. Say that number again.
Currently, there are 17 that are Star 1 and Star 2.
Okay, out of 86.
Out of 86, yes. And originally, we started with 39, so there are 22 that have improved to quality.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, even in the Star 1 and Star 2 centers, all of the PHL pre-K classrooms were required to operate at the Star 3 level. So that meant that they had the appropriate staff that had the equivalent credentials to what our Star 3 providers are required to have in the Star 3 classrooms.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good to know. But again, it's not what was originally proposed and sold to our communities. And so I just think that we need to be consistent on that. I have one other very quick question, which is for DHS. And Jane, you mentioned that $1.5 million was coming from the city budget to DHS and $9 million from the state and federal sources. And I just wanted to be clear because I couldn't figure out exactly where those funds were going, if they were going to CUAs to support foster care support and services, or if they were going to DHS directly. I have, as the commissioner will acknowledge, I have not been a fan of the CUA system. And so I have, a great amount of concern for, what would be, $10.5 million, if that's where those funds are going. So.
Good afternoon, Cynthia Figueroa, Commissioner, DHS. Just to clarify, the increase is for foster care providers. We have just over 25 plus providers that we work with our network. They're the providers that actually license the home for the parents who take children in from the Department of Human Services. And the total amount is the federal state dollars that come from the match. So the majority of the funding comes from the state, and the city contributes a portion.
So then some of these funds are going to CUAs, is that what I'm hearing?
So there are some CUAs who are also foster care
Right.
providers. So
Right.
it's an independent contract from the CUA contract.
How many of the CUAs would be eligible to receive funds?
So all 6 of the organizations that operate CUAs have foster care contracts as well.
So all of them would be eligible for these funds?
Correct. And they vary depending on how many homes are licensed.
Okay. All right, thank you. That
Thank you.
answers my questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Fiona Sanchez.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to go through a little bit around the expectations with our increased funding to the school district. And one, for the record, state that every time we've done increases for the school district, we've been very specific about targeting the money to what we considered shared values. So K-3 support, student supports, counselors, nurses, and some of the other issues. Rob mentioned this is kind of a lump sum. So Jane, can you articulate what is the mayor's expectation of local control and this funding is supposed to get us? Like, what are the areas that we've been specific about where we want to see continued investments, obviously where we've seen progress?
Yeah, so I think one of the areas that we want to invest in is early literacy. So I believe the plan includes reading coaches for elementary school and expanding some of the current programs provided for early literacy, up through grades 4 and 5. There is also some investments in career and college readiness, including expanding and improving CTE programs, apprenticeship programs, IT internships, high school pathways, also expanding college access and preparedness with advanced placement courses, free SAT testing, the middle college program where high school students...
So that you don't use all my 5 minutes. So we expect to be, can we not, as the council president said, can we not get that information at the last minute? Can we really specifically look at where the targets are going to be? Is it an expectation by the administration, because I think Councilman O alluded to this, we don't have a student-weighted formula locally.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been requested of the district? So if we make this kind of long-term infusion of money that we get there, outside of what's going on at the state, is there an expectation that we will do that?
An expectation that we'll get a per pupil funding increase?
Student-weighted formula for what, if we're going to now become an equal funder of the school district, are we going to have a student-weighted formula? I think in the school districts, whether it was Renaissance or others, they've been able to see that when they invest in low-performing schools, additional money, they get a better return. How is this money going to be utilized to ensure that the money is going where the highest needs is?
Yeah, so I think these are all the programs that we're investing in. If it's in terms of how are we getting the school district to report back on those successes, I do think that is something that we want the school district here to talk a little bit more about with us.
Yeah, I think that they should be expected to come in with that kind of commitment that if it takes us 2 years, if it takes us 5 years in this 5-year plan, but I'd like to see that because as Councilman O alluded to, the good schools are always the good schools, right? Bad schools are always the bad schools. Then we pump in money and they become better schools. But we don't pump in money to enough of those schools. So I think that if we want to make this kind of investment, I think at minimum we should have a pathway to how we get there. But let me be clear that every time we voted for a tax increase, we've been very, very specific about where the money goes. We talked about savings trans passes. We talked about K-3. It's never been like, you get this lump sum, you get to decide where it goes. So just for the record, because all of us are going to be looking at that. As it relates to the investments in public safety, I wanted the administration to articulate to me, how do we explain the increased funding around police when we're also talking about decriminalization? So our budget is now going to go to 31% to public safety. What's the messaging around that?
So a number of those investments are going into the fire department as well, which is really focused on sort of improving the level of service since that's been an area where they just didn't have sufficient funding in the past. I think when we're looking at the police funding, we are trying to address some of the challenges that we have of crime fighting in various neighborhoods, and that we just need to have the full force in order to do that. I don't think that it is that they are out there in order to arrest more people. It is that they are out there to keep more people safe.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's going to be a need, particularly when the police department comes up. There's all this discussion around decriminalization. And again, I'm a high need area, right? I don't want a police state though, right? There's a difference between smart policing and just having a bunch of police out there. And I think we owe it to the citizens to kind of explain what are we going to do different to make them safer. Thank you, Council President.
Good.
I'll wait for him.
Good.
Oh, I can just...
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you very much. We have talked to the airport, and that's worked out, and those people will be paid and notified today or tomorrow about payment, so that's okay.
Great.
Thank you, Lord.
Sure.
Number two, I agree with all that has been said by my colleagues. I seem to be in order. so I can benefit from what they're saying. And as council knows, we've worked hard on CAP program and CTE program, and we will be expecting great things from those programs when it comes to these neighborhood schools, people working, because we work a lot with our institutions. We want certainly you to deal with our institutions, but we want you to make sure we have specific, detailed information about this group of students. It's so important that they get a chance. And we tried to start it, or not start it, but expand it. And we're asking certainly that we receive a lot of details and that you work hard to make that happen. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. Could we ask Commissioner Breslin to come up, maybe? Good afternoon, Commissioner. You ever watch Johnny Carson when he used to be on, and he held the envelope to his head?
I did, Karnak.
Karnak, right. So I hold in my hand.
Let Commissioner state your name for the record.
Frank Breslin, Revenue Commissioner.
Thank you.
An investor who lives in Villanova, Pennsylvania, has 33 delinquent properties and real estate taxes. Some go back 19 years, totaling $293,000 against $3.7 million of value that owes us money right now. So a few questions I wanted to ask you about our delinquencies, which by the way, I will commend you and your department. I think you've improved the delinquency collection in the last few years that I've been here in a very good fashion, so that's positive. On real estate taxes, just so we're clear, real estate taxes are a first lien on real estate? They come
Correct.
before the mortgage?
That's correct.
Okay. And in the reports that you provide us on real estate taxes, we write off any debt that's greater than 10 years? We don't report it on the statement.
We categorize it differently, so
Right.
we don't call it an active delinquency. It's
Right.
an older delinquency. But for collection purposes, it's not written off. We still
Okay.
actively pursue it.
Still active for collection?
Yes.
Okay. So, and the last time that I checked on real estate, there was about $394 million, including interest and penalties, including the current 10 years and the prior delinquencies.
I think that's about right, yep.
And if I recall, about 110 million were in different types of payment plans or bankrupt or old liens that are in programs we can't really go after.
What was that percentage?
110 million of that 394.
That is, yes, 25%, that's about right, yep.
And of the total delinquent properties, there were 67,000 delinquent properties, of which, if I recall, 16% or about 25% are owner-occupied, or we believe are owner-occupied, and 51,000 are commercial, industrial, multifamily, investors, whether it's residential or commercial, and vacant property.
I'm not positive on those numbers. They sound about right, though. I'd have to check them.
Okay. And so, if we were to exclude owner-occupieds from collections, we would still be able to collect against 75% of the delinquency, it appears, of the dollars.
I think that's about right. But I know we prepared an analysis of that, and I can get
Right.
those numbers to you.
And right now, you report a collection rate of 95.5, I think, percent?
95.5, correct.
95. And on a collection, on a billing of 1.45 billion roughly is going to be our new real estate tax bill, roughly, in that range? So for every point that we improve collection, it's 14,500,000. So if we improve our collection rate by 2 points, it's 29 million per year.
Yes.
And if it's 3 points, it's 42 or 43 million per year, which over 5 years could be either 150 million or over 200 million over a 5-year projection. And I'm not counting the back stuff. I'm just talking about improving the current collection rate.
Correct. 95.5 refers to our collection within the year of the delinquency.
Okay.
Just one
Within the year of
point.
the levy, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
it also, that assumes that we aren't already collecting some of the stuff that's not collected within the first year, within the 5-year plan. And the 5-year plan assumes delinquency collection. So some of that, when you're when you're increasing the on-time collection, you lose some delinquency. So there's some trade-off. So it would definitely be more revenue, probably a little less than the numbers we're talking about.
But when we did that study 2 years ago, the numbers were between of the old stuff that we could maybe collect, the 394, that's really only 294, or 290. They thought we could collect 75 to maybe $90 million of the old stuff. Is that still pretty accurate?
That number looked at the entire delinquency and didn't look for the status of the delinquencies. So there were a lot of numbers in that study which we wouldn't be able to collect in that process because we call them inactionable. They're people that are in payment agreements. They may be in bankruptcy. They're maybe under appeal.
Right.
So at the time, we noted that those numbers were probably significantly overstated because of that.
So there's 2 points here. One is the ongoing collection rate increase, and the other is the collection of the back taxes. And the collection of the back taxes, what do you think is a reasonable number if we moved forward?
No, I don't have a projection.
Excluding owner occupants. I'm talking about taking owner occupants off the table.
Just how much in delinquency can we collect per year?
What's the potential that we could collect?
I mean, I think our number has been about $100 million of delinquency. I'll have to look at that collection number. And I think we've been making, if you look at the CAFR and you look at the 95.5, you'll see that number has been rising every year. So we're very proud of that number. We've been reducing the number of delinquents. So I think the point here is that I'm trying to make is the department has been making great progress in collecting delinquents,
right,
in collecting delinquent real estate.
But we're using the program that we've talked about, which you've supported, and so has Rob, and so has the mayor. That would increase our collection rate on an ongoing basis, potentially 2 to 3 points.
Well, I think you're talking about like the New York model of a lien sale,
yes,
which securitization.
Yes. Right.
So when we looked at that, at the time we looked at that, our collection number in the year of the levy was significantly lower. So we're happy that over the last 2 years, that number has been going up and hopefully will continue to go up. When we looked at jurisdictions that were doing that, they had the target was to get the collection up to 98%. So kind of what's happened is, although we're still looking at securitization and we're not soured on it, but the dynamics are changing a little bit because we've been making incremental progress and we've been closing that gap. So really, I think the analysis that we would have to make would be with the percentage we're at now at 95.5, which hopefully will even be higher when we close the fiscal year, and a higher number for the 2018 CAFR, is whether securitization still makes sense. And because jurisdictions took some time to achieve that 98%, it wasn't a silver bullet, so it didn't happen instantaneously. So I think that's the analysis we would do. And an important part of securitization that every jurisdiction does and we would do is the due diligence stage. So everything that we're talking about here is really preliminary, and it was looking, without a deep dive into the delinquency. But before we would move forward with a securitization, a really important part of the process would be a due diligence phase, where a manager would come in and really take that deep dive into our delinquency and make a determination whether securitization makes sense. Because it's a totally different process of collection. It's actually bringing in a manager who's going to securitize a small pool of that delinquency and actually create a trust and issue bonds. And there's costs associated with that. So really, and risk associated with that. So I think the due diligence phase is really critical, even more critical now as we have a smaller delinquency, to see if this really makes sense in one, increasing that collection percentage, but two, in light of the costs associated with it. Because as the delinquency reduces, then those costs a lot of them are kind of fixed costs and they're not going to decrease because the delinquency did. So as we look at it as a percentage of the delinquency, does it make sense? Because the percentage would then be higher.
But you still have 67,000 delinquent properties, of which 16,000 are owner occupants and 51,000 are commercial, industrial, and investors in vacant land. That's still on the books.
Yes, and as I referred to earlier, what ends up happening is, as part of the securitization, is you take that pool, we would take our pool of our total delinquents, and then out of that pool, we have to take out everything that's inactionable. So that's the bankruptcies, the payment agreements, we would take out owner-occupied out of that, we'd probably take vacant land out of that, and then there's also guidelines that the manager has. So there's age of debt, there's lien to value ratios, a whole host of factors that the manager would then apply to the delinquency and boil it down to what's available for securitization. And that's really the number that we would have to get to. We can't do that until...
Well, let me just, we looked at this 3 or 4 months ago, and I think you guys said to me 19,000 of those properties could be securitized, okay? And they would produce enough revenue. That's what I was told.
With the owner-occupied?
No,
I'm sorry, not
commercial.
With just the commercial.
And like this person who's in Villanova, who has 33 properties, and some go back 19 years, would this method take care of getting these taxes paid?
Yeah, but as I said, we would have to look at those delinquencies and see if they would be part of the securitization process. And it's a very complicated process, and hopefully it would. And I'm assuming that that taxpayer is an actionable taxpayer, so they're not in a payment agreement. One of the enforcement tools that we started a little over a year ago, and it was designed exactly for taxpayers like this, is we're able to move the liens from the Philadelphia properties and actually place a lien, in this case, on that Villanova property. So now that investor his personal residence is not protected. If he wanted to sell that residence, if he wanted to borrow on that residence, then he would have to satisfy the liens on the investment property. So so I think that's why our collection numbers are higher. We're using a lot of different tools. We've been really focused on this for the past 4 or 5 years, and we're seeing the benefits right now. And we've been talking about the right tool at the right time, and that's been our motto, and that's always been why we wanted securitization as part of that. It's an additional tool that we would only use if it was right for this situation, and that's what we would determine through the due diligence phase with a manager.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Council President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Mr. President, real quick. Actually, I had no intention on asking you questions today, but...
My lucky day.
Councilman Dahm's. I'm sorry. But real quick, the properties that the councilman just referenced, is there anything that stops us from moving ahead on those liens by certifying them for sheriff's sale or other?
No.
So bottom line, we can get our money currently with the current program, and then I think the legislation, I think you briefly mentioned it, that we got authorized by the state a year or so ago that allowed us to do. Can we do that on those properties in question?
Yes, and my guess would be we probably have on that particular property. The councilman will share the information about that account. We'll check to make sure that we've had. And my guess would also be that those properties are probably in our enforcement process for foreclosure. And if they're not, we'll look why. But that's why I asked about the enforcement status. It's also possible if they're in payment agreements, then there would be nothing else we would do. They're considered essentially compliant.
Okay. I want to thank you. You had your team out Saturday. It was a kind of a pilot program on the UPA program, had up in the library in Strawberry Mansion. And I was impressed with the folks that you had lined up in terms of the setup and the availability. Had some folks coming in making agreements on site, and I understand it was the first one. We do have to make some tweaks in terms of getting responses. Probably got to change the flyer a little bit. It was, I can see a person getting that particular flyer we send out and say, I'm not going there, But I just want to tell you, your group there was really, really impressive and on time. And I was witnessing people actually coming in and had the notice that was sent out, and they were making agreements right there. So our ability to roll that out in earnest across the city is something that we clearly should do, particularly for those owner-occupied properties, and then expanding it to commercial to get people to come in and make reasonable agreements. So I want to thank you and your team for working with us on that.
You're welcome, and thank you. I'll pass that along to my team.
I know you didn't anticipate me congratulating you on some
I
great
did not,
stuff.
but I'm glad.
It really was your lucky day.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I won't proceed with this other information, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Guiona Sanchez.
Thank you. I have two brief ones, and then I'll stop. Anna mentioned earlier that there's some potential increases in taxable revenues. Can we get a copy of what those fees and fines are and what we have in outstanding collections? I want to make sure that we don't overburden, particularly, people look at all of these as nickel and diming them, right? When we look to increase all of these things, it's the cost of doing business. It's like, well, I got to pay more for, a copy of a record that the city has. Don't my taxes pay for that? So I just want to be mindful of that as we look at those. And then my last one is one of the things that this department rolled out this year was this new litter index chart, right? And so going back to the streets department is on the performance-based budgeting,
Yes.
right? So the index is out, so now folks can see how they're doing, right?
Yes.
So what is going to be our goals for improvement, and how will our performance-based budgeting show the resources being allocated to meet those goals?
So I think the Streets Commissioner is here, and he can talk a little bit about kind of the goals related to litter. So program-based budgeting has now, previously, all sanitation was in one big division. And now under program-based budgeting, that has been split into multiple programs. So you can see a little more clearly how the sanitation budget works and what are the specific initiatives that Streets has related to sanitation. And I don't have the measures in front of me, but you can then see kind of related to recycling, related to trash collection, on-time pickup. That's all kind of connected. In the budget detail, it'll show that not only all the expenditures, but also kind of the measures and how we are evaluating how effective that program is being. I'm not sure, and I'd defer to Carlton about whether there is a specific goal that we've included with litter, but if not, we can work on that.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman. Carlton Williams, Streets Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia. Yes, we did a litter index last year that was a very detailed, objective measurement of where we're having problematic locations. We've always done litter indexing, but not like this before, where we measured every block in the City of Philadelphia and gave it a score based on its current condition. The goal is to take a look at where we're having our most problems at, and it's not as surprising as we've done in the past, but this is more detailed because we're now able to pinpoint exactly where our most challenging parts of the city are, so we can target limited resources. What we hope to do with that data is, number one, target those resources to have better enforcement methods. We certainly thank City Council, yourself, Councilman Green, for increasing the fines to go after illegal dumpers, which is probably the number one biggest challenge that we're facing in terms of litter conditions in our city today, with the number of tires that we're finding on the streets, the constant construction debris in locations, specifically in your district. Those are many of the challenges that we're trying to target and face. We were looking at making investments and extending our camera program with fiber optics to now try to catch people and hold them accountable, as opposed to giving them a slap on the wrist or not being able to catch them at all. So this data is very important for us to be able to target those areas so that we can extend those limited resources to try to prevent these problems from continuously reoccurring.
So you're going to target the, top 100 sites? What does that look like? I want to see what is the resources allocation to them, right? So we have certain commercial corridors, deep need. Like, are we going to be able to see kind of those resources tied into those? What I don't want to be is in a situation where 3 years out, we have a map,
that doesn't change.
Yes.
Right? Because we're not allocating the resources to those targeted. I mean, this camera situation is beyond me. Why we can't have these cameras up quicker, faster, all those things. But, what are we going to be able to establish some goals? Because now anybody can go online and see what my litter index is, right?
That's correct.
And then I'm going to go out and they're going to say, well, what are you doing about my litter index? Which, by the way, I look at all the time, every time I'm going somewhere, because I know I'm going to get asked that question. What is going to be the correlation between your budget and those litter index?
You make a good point. So we certainly have to look at what our current resources are to try to address those issues and what are they. The other purpose of that index as well is to try to engage the community to see what they're going to do as well. We kicked off one of the very many neighborhood community meetings, one coming to your district really soon, to engage block captains and residents on solutions to problematic locations that we continue to service. So for this year's Philly Spring Cleanup, for example, we've targeted areas that are continuously dumping around the viaduct areas around with SEPTA's Amtrak service that comes into the city. And we're working with those residents to try to come up with solutions to address illegal dumping. And a lot of this stuff happens to be, unfortunately, residential trash, that people are just coming out their homes and dumping it over onto the tracks. So we have to change that type of behavior, but now we know where it's occurring. We can go out and message to them and talk about ways in which we can prevent it. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to do enforcement. And so those fines that you passed last year are very important to us.
So we're going to continue to challenge SEPTA to step up more to the plate around their little indexes. I want us to really monitor those bus stops where my indexes are higher, because they do have everything to do with being bus stops and the people's inability to take trash into the buses. And we need to have a plan. SEPTA, those are their customers.
Right. So they're a part of the Zero Waste and Litter cabinet. We're happy to say that we're working very closely with them to talk about those issues. We don't have a concrete plan to address litter around bus stops at this moment, but that's something that is definitely a part of the conversation, and we certainly look forward to working with your office to continue that.
Well, SEPTA is going to have to put up.
Understood.
That's their customers. Kensington and Allegheny, 30,000 people. It is filthy. It is filthy. It's their customers. We can't keep just talking about it. They have to give us, we now know most of the litter is theirs or their customer based. We need to have something more concrete than we're working together, they're part of the cabinet. This is their customer base. They need to give us a plan. And I think we shouldn't accept anything other than a plan for that.
Understood, Councilwoman.
I mean, they keep fighting this, we won't have a trash can in our buses. But then the neighbor at the corner doesn't want to have a trash can, because then they get fined, and that's why how we fine people and do these fees is hugely important. It sends a message. But I look forward to working with you, Commissioner. I know we have a lot of sites. We try to work on them.
Absolutely.
You need to have your cameras wherever you need to have them.
Okay.
And we need to get SEPTA to pick up their trash.
Understood.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman.
Commissioner?
Commissioner? Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to follow up on, and I wanted to thank your office, as well as I believe the District Attorney's Office and Managing Director's Office, on that short dumping legislation that we did a little while ago. I'm curious, one of the challenges, even with the increase in fines, is that how do we find a way to get, for lack of a better word, deputize people to report on those that are doing short dumping? And I know that doing the cameras and some of the other technology help, but what have been some of the practices you've seen in other cities to try to get more people engaged, trying to change the culture regarding litter?
So some of the things that we are doing here in the city is with that same litter index and that interactive site. The reason we wanted to publicize it was that there is an app that's directly related to 311 where you can report dumping and those type of initiatives immediately. So when someone sees it, they can actually report it, and we'll take action, and they can characterize it, whether it's just loose litter or it's just something that the city needs to immediately address. So there's a stronger interaction and engagement with the public by making this data available in real time online. That's one of the benefits. Other cities, we work very closely with Keep America Beautiful and Keep Philadelphia Beautiful. Some of their litter strategies is the actual public participates in those indexes, and to be able to report that information to measure what's happening in there and occurring in their neighborhood is very important. In terms of the way we actually try to enforce it and whether they can report it directly to the police department, that's something that we're working on. I think cameras help us because we understand that the police department can't physically man those locations all the time. So by having this video surveillance, we hope to have enough evidence to turn over to the police department so we can make an arrest. And I think we've been very effective working with the community and the public to kind of identify where those problems are so that we can then begin the process of building out our program. I also want to thank the District Attorney's Office. They've also been a part of the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet. Unlike before, we haven't gotten as much support in terms of enforcement, and that means the follow-up necessary to actually convict someone. We've gotten a tremendous amount of support, certainly recently, with them to being able to go out and identify who these people are and then holding them accountable.
And just one final comment, I would think that with the spring cleanup initiative and how the marketing that's really become a thing that many people look forward to every year. I think that's another way of getting information out regarding short dumping and getting people to be more vigilant to report, especially through 301, if they see people short dumping, because that kind of counteracts all the work that citizens around the city do in reference to trying to beautify our city.
Yes, we agree.
Next question will be for Rob DeBoe. Looking through my notes from the last 2 years, the issue of CAMA has come up again. So I wanted to get a perspective on where we are regarding CAMA.
Yep, so I think where we were last year is we were in the selection process for a vendor. We now have the vendor on board. CAMA is scheduled to be finished in the middle of FY20, so probably by the end of 2019, and then will be used for assessment processes beginning with the tax year 21 and each year going forward from that.
So the last year we lost a vendor, so now we have a vendor on board.
Have a vendor on
board. We don't anticipate any issues, and they should be able to move forward so we can really get to where we need to be.
Correct.
Okay. Hopefully I won't have to come back next year.
I hope that when we come back next year, we'll be in the final stages of getting to go live.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. A couple of quick questions, easy answers. Since 2016...
3 words.
Yeah, 3 words, right. Since 2016, any idea of how many new positions we've created in the city, new employment positions?
Since 2016, I didn't have any positions.
We'll get back to you.
Okay.
Sorry, that was more than 3 words.
That's okay. And this is for you, Rob. We had the road to 80% on the pensions.
Yes.
Are we still on track to get there in 13 years?
We are. We still have a couple of big union negotiations to go through, so hopefully we'll get reform in those too, and then be able to apply that reform to our exempt and non-represented employees. But we are.
Okay. And on the overtime of 170, does that include the water department, airport, and DHS?
No, sorry, I was
That
just referring to the general.
Includes the general fund portion at DHS, but does not include water or aviation.
Okay. And just for my own information, what is roughly the amount of delinquency we have right now for water and sewer?
Michelle Bethel is going to come answer that question.
While we're waiting for that, I have another question. 46th and Market, any status on the former police headquarters proposed building?
Yeah.
I believe that the RFP is out right now, and that's basically...
RFP for us to sell it?
So we issued an RFQ towards the end of last year. We now, I would say about a month ago, PIDC issued the RFP to a shortlisted group of respondents. I don't have the exact date when those RFP responses are due. I want to say May. And then the plan is to sell it outright, yes. Once I should say. We don't plan to just sell it and then hope somebody develops it, there will be a development agreement. But the idea is that, excuse me, at the end of due diligence and all of that, that the building will be sold outright.
Did we hire an architect to determine the highest and best use for that property in order so maybe we could capture some of the value and have it rezoned?
Right, so we actually have been working with Councilwoman Blackwell, because we did do an analysis. The existing zoning of the property is CMX3. Based on the amount of land available, there frankly is floor to area ratio to burn on that site. So an upzoning really doesn't get us anything. However, we did determine that creating the TOD layover there would be a benefit for that site and would add value to it. So we are working with Councilwoman Blackwell. That legislation to rezone has been introduced. I believe it's working its way through the process. I'm not 100% sure that it's finalized yet, but it's on its way. So we did look at that, yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Sure.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Michelle Bethel, Deputy Revenue Commissioner for Water. And your question was the total receivables or delinquencies?
I want to give me both.
Okay. Total receivables as of February is $396,625,891, and of the amount, $261,204,322 are delinquent.
And does the Revenue Department do that collection?
Yes.
They do, okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no other further questions. Thank you, Council President.
Great. Thank you, sir. Good? Councilman, I'm, like, as in, we're good? All right. That bell is for me, so it means it's time for a break. There are no additional questions. This committee will stand in recess until Tuesday, March 27, 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene in room 400, City Hall. Thank you all very much.
So bad, but I know.
People excited. Look at that.